Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. I used to clean the church at night because I liked the quiet. The air inside St. Margaret's on East Willow Avenue, Portland, Oregon, always smelled of wax and rain, like secrets trying to dry. The candles left a faint sweetness under the heavier scent of damp wood, and the echo of my mop against the marble floor had become its own kind of prayer. I was 31, divorced, forgettable, the sort of woman who vanished between glances. Night after night, I stayed long after the priest had gone, the church shrinking down to breath and shadow. That Tuesday started like every other, drizzle tapping the stained glass, the fluorescent exit sign humming over the vestibule. I remember the clock reading 10:47 when I wrung out the mop, humming without realizing it. Something soft, the tune from an old radio jingle. It's strange what your mouth remembers when your heart forgets to beat. Then a voice came from the confessional, low, male. "Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned." I froze. Father Lewis had left at 9. I'd watched his taillights fade down the street. At first I thought maybe someone had slipped in looking for prayer or warmth. The homeless sometimes did. But then, my name. Nora Callahan. The syllables carried through the carved screen like a hand brushing my neck. I dropped the mop. Water bled across the marble, shining in the candlelight. He kept talking, calm, as if reciting from memory. Said he'd been watching me leave every night, that I hummed when I was nervous, that he knew the color of my toothbrush. I wanted to run, but couldn't remember how to move. Every sound felt loud, the rain, my pulse, the faint squeal of the wood as he shifted. Then, "I want to see what you look like when you're afraid." The air thinned. My skin tightened around me like plastic. I stepped backward, tripping on the bucket. "Who are you?" I meant to shout. It came out as a whisper. He laughed. Not cruel, almost tender. "You'll know soon. You've earned it." The next sound was the click of the latch. I ran, out through the nave, past the altar's red candle. Behind me, something scraped. The booth door, a shoe. But when I burst into the rain, no one followed. By the time the police arrived, there were no footprints, just wet smudges leading nowhere. They told me maybe I imagined it, that churches echo, that grief and divorce make you jumpy. I nodded because arguing felt pointless, but I knew what I heard. That night I didn't sleep. Every shadow in my apartment looked like it was waiting to breathe. Over the next week I tried to keep the job. Told myself it was a prank, a voice caught in old wood. But the church began to feel alive in a different way, as if it had learned my routine. The red light above the confessional, the one that signals a session, started flicking on after hours. At first once, then nightly, always when I was alone. I told Father Lewis. He frowned, kind but detached. "Probably faulty wiring, Nora. She's an old building." He didn't even write it down. One evening I lingered outside the booth. The light was off. The door stood slightly open. I could see the narrow bench, the curtain on the priest's side half drawn. Nothing inside but the smell of polish and incense. Still, the air was warm, breathing warm. I backed away. At home, the phone started ringing at odd hours. Always one ring, then silence. My name appeared on my own caller ID once, Callahan N. I dropped the phone, let it ring out until the display went dark. I began to notice other things. The blinds in my apartment drawn when I knew I'd left them open. A cup I hadn't used sat in the sink, still damp. Once, my toothbrush lay on the counter, bristles bent as if someone had pressed too hard. I stopped telling people. My mother would only hear fatigue in my voice. My ex-husband would think it was leverage, so I talked to the church instead. Whispered under my breath while scrubbing pews. I'm not afraid. I just want peace. Sometimes it felt like the walls listened. Sometimes like they answered. The crack of old timber shifting closer to my ear. 2 Fridays later, Father Lewis announced he'd be gone for a week's retreat. He left me the keys, said he trusted me. That first night alone, the rain was relentless. By 11, I'd finished most of the floor, but the confessional light clicked on again. Red, steady, patient. I stood across the nave, mop handle slick in my hands. The bulb burned like an eye. "Stop it," I said, my voice shaking the silence. It didn't stop. I forced myself forward. Each step echoed twice, mine and something following half a beat late. At the booth, I touched the door. Warm. The light above flickered, then steadied. Nora. My knees buckled. I pushed the door open. Empty. But the voice wasn't from inside anymore. It was behind me, close enough to feel the exhale on my neck. "Your turn. Confess what you did to deserve me." I swung around. No one. Just the flicker of candles, the sheen of wet marble. I left everything, bucket, rags, keys, and ran until my lungs felt cut open. The next morning I tried to quit. Father Lewis hadn't left yet for his retreat. He looked worried but unconvinced. "Maybe you're under stress," he said gently. "Take a few nights off. Sleep." He blessed me before I left, his hand hovering a moment too long as though unsure where to rest it. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thin lattice screen, heard the breath behind it, patient and wet. By Sunday, I went back. I needed to prove something. That the church wasn't haunted, that I wasn't losing my mind. I brought my phone to record, set it on the bench near the confessional while I cleaned. Nothing happened for nearly an hour. I started to feel foolish. Then, a soft tap. Not from the booth, but from the phone itself. The screen lit. Recording stopped. A new file appeared, confessed MP3. I pressed play. Static. Then breathing. Then my own voice whispering, "Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned." I dropped the phone. It kept playing. The voice, my voice, described things I'd never said aloud. How I'd once left my sister alone during a storm, how she'd almost drowned. How sometimes I still wished she hadn't been found. When I finally managed to delete the file, it returned minutes later, renamed Confess 1902, MP3. That's when I smashed the phone. After that, the boundaries blurred. I'd find church dust on my apartment floor, candle soot on my hands when I woke. I started keeping the lights off while cleaning. It felt safer not to see where the breathing came from. Neighbors said I looked pale. One asked if I'd joined some religious group. I laughed too hard, too long. Then one night, I noticed something carved into the confessional wood. Tiny letters etched near the screen. "I forgive you." They weren't there before. I ran my fingers over the grooves. The wood was fresh, still catching splinters. Beneath it, in smaller letters, my name. I began to think maybe the church wasn't separate from me anymore. Maybe it had learned my rhythm the way the voice had. The light turned on even when I wasn't there. Once, passing by on the street, I saw it glowing through the window. The doors were locked. That was the night I dreamed of the booth breathing, the lattice expanding, contracting, whispering my lullaby through every hole. When I woke, my apartment smelled like wax and rain. My pillowcase was damp, as if someone had leaned close and whispered through it. Yesterday, Father Lewis called. His voice sounded thin, frightened. He'd listened to the church's voicemail remotely. A message had appeared with no caller ID, just static and a woman's voice. He said it was me. I told him I hadn't called. He said, "Then who said you shouldn't have locked him in?" I hung up. Tonight, I'm back here. I don't remember driving, but the keys were in my hand when I arrived. The church feels smaller, the air thicker, like it's waiting. The red light is already on. I think about opening the door, about finishing the sentence I never said that night. Maybe that's the point. Not to run, but to listen. The wax smell is stronger now, almost sweet enough to taste. The rain stopped. Everything's too quiet. He's here. I can feel it, not behind the screen, but inside the same air I'm breathing. He says my name, gently, like prayer. Nora. Confess. And I finally understand. Maybe he was never outside the booth. Maybe I was. The red light flickers once, then steadies. I step inside. It's warmer than I remember, almost welcoming. The door closes, the latch clicks, and in the hush that follows, I hear two breaths become one. I always thought confessions were supposed to end things. Turns out mine just started something worse. My name is Claire Price, 34, transcriptionist for the Detroit Police Department South Precinct. I've listened to hundreds of hours of other people's sins, murderers, liars, broken voices in cold rooms, but I've never told anyone that the one voice I can't stop hearing is my own. The walls in our audio archive room hum differently at night. Maybe it's the age of the building. Concrete stacked on concrete since the 70s. Or maybe it's what those walls have absorbed. Every voice that's ever confessed something that can't be forgotten. Every whisper that should have stayed buried. I started working nights 2 years ago after my divorce. It's quieter then, easier to think. Or it used to be. Now the tapes think for me. The room smells like dust and burnt wiring. 3 reels sit on my desk tonight, labeled in thin black marker. Mercer Eli, ZO2 1724, Price S, and one unmarked plastic cracked along the edge like a tooth. Detective Samuel Price used to sit at the desk across from me. My brother. He was found dead in his apartment 7 months ago. Heart failure, they said. A closed case. But when I came in that night to file his personal effects, I found the recorder, still running, still humming. And when I hit play, it said my name. The first time I heard it, I thought I was tired. I'd been cataloging files for 14 hours, eyes stinging from fluorescent light, the coffee in the styrofoam cup gone cold and oily. Static filled the speakers like rain on tin. Then, softly, my name. Claire. Not a hallucination, not grief. His voice. Except, not quite. There was something behind it, like a second breath woven through the syllables, echoing a half-second late. I replayed it 3 times before I noticed the timestamp didn't move. The counter on the machine was frozen at 0000, even as the sound played on. I unplugged it. The hum didn't stop. I told myself it was malfunction. Old equipment, dust in the wires. But I took the reel home that night anyway. I wanted to hear Sam again, just his voice before everything went wrong. At home, the quiet hit different. The kind of quiet that listens back. I live in a 1-bedroom near Jefferson Avenue, 4th floor, windows facing the river. The sound of barges usually drowns everything out, but that night the water was still. The air too heavy. Even the fridge stopped humming, like the apartment was holding its breath. I pressed play, static. Then the sound of a chair creaking. Then Sam's voice. You'll see. I hadn't heard him say that since we were kids. His taunt whenever he dared me into the dark. But this wasn't childhood. This was after Eli Mercer died. After Sam did the intake interview. After the tape changed hands. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it, each time noticing something new. The faint shuffle of papers, a drip like water hitting metal, and beneath it all that low pulse, almost like breathing through a wall. At 3:19 a.m., the tape clicked off on its own. I didn't touch it. It rewound itself. Then it started recording. The red light blinked. I froze, phone half raised, ready to film or call someone, anyone, but I didn't move. Because I could hear it. The hum had words this time. Not through the speakers, but from inside the machine. Your turn, Claire. The next morning, I brought it back to the precinct. No one else seemed to notice the sound. Lieutenant Graves walked past and said, "You look like hell, Price." I said I was fine. He handed me another stack of tapes to transcribe. Internal Affairs wants Mercer's file re-reviewed. Some inconsistency in the last statement. When he left, I locked the door and played Mercer's tape. It starts normal. Sam's steady tone, questions about the night of the incident, Eli's responses thin and reedy, the sound of rain against the interrogation room vent. Then, at 17:32, Eli says, "It's not mine anymore. The voice won't stay in me." There's a faint laugh, Sam's, and then the reel sputters, the recording twists, voices bleed together. For a moment, I can't tell who's speaking. Then Eli's voice fades, and Sam's comes through alone. I hear her now. I stopped the playback, hands shaking. I wasn't supposed to be on any recording, but the voice, whoever her was, sounded like me. Over the next few nights, things started echoing. Every sound in the building had a twin. My footsteps doubled. The elevator dinged twice. Even my own breathing came back to me a beat too late. I tried switching recorders, transcribing on different machines. Didn't matter. Each time I pressed play, I could hear a faint distortion, like the tape was replaying what I was about to say. The files began corrupting in the system. When I opened the transcript folder, every document name had changed to a date, 10/12/25, today's date. And when I opened one, it wasn't a transcript. It was a confession. Mine, written in perfect police format. Signed C. Price. The crime? Homicide, Samuel Price. I told myself it was a virus, someone screwing with me. But I couldn't bring it to tech support without admitting I'd taken evidence home. So I tried deleting the files myself. They reappeared before I finished pressing enter. By the 5th day, I stopped sleeping altogether. Every time I blinked, I saw the waveform, those jagged peaks of someone else's breath. It followed me into the shower, the hallway, the elevator. At one point, I caught my reflection mouthing words I hadn't spoken yet. That night, the phone rang. No number, just static. Then Sam's voice. "You're recording now, aren't you?" The line went dead, but the recorder light on my desk blinked. Red, recording. Only I hadn't touched it. I called Lieutenant Graves, babbling something about corrupted files, about needing to check the archives. He told me to go home, take a week off. "You've been under strain, Claire. We all miss Sam, but this isn't healthy." He didn't believe me. No one did. But when I went to the archive that night, the door was unlocked. Inside, every reel was spinning, hundreds of them, empty tape loops turning in perfect sync, the sound rising like insects. One reel had fallen off the rack. It rolled toward my shoe. Label, Price, S. I picked it up. The edge was sticky like blood dried too long on metal. I placed it on the player, pressed play. Silence. Then my own voice. "I understand now. It needs someone to finish the story." I don't remember leaving the building. I only remember the sound of rain and the pulse in my ears. When I woke up, I was in my apartment. The recorder sat on the table beside me, light blinking steadily. I hit play. The tape began with a sound I didn't recognize. A wet shuffle, a chair scraping concrete, breathing close to the mic. Then Graves's voice. "Detective Price, do you have anything to confess?" And Sam's answer, faint. "It's not over." Then mine, recorded after his death. "Your turn." The next morning, 2 officers came to my door. Internal Affairs. They said they'd received a recording, a confession from me describing a murder that hadn't happened yet. They wouldn't tell me who the victim was. They just asked if I had anything to say for myself. I told them no, but I could hear it. The faint hum in their radio earpieces. The same static, the same rhythm, the same heartbeat hiding in the wires. Now I'm in interview room 3, where the fluorescent light hums like an insect pinned alive. They left me here with a tape recorder. Said they'd be back when I was ready to talk. It's been recording for 20 minutes. No one else in the room. Yet I can hear breathing on the playback. Slow, deliberate, like someone sitting just behind me. I tell myself to stop listening, but the sound keeps going, static shifting into syllables, then words. My brother's voice again, close enough to fog the glass. Almost finished, Claire. They'll find this tape eventually. They'll call it another false confession. Another case of a cop's sister losing her mind. But when they play it back, they'll hear something they can't explain. Because the static isn't random anymore. It's forming words. And the last one is theirs. The recorder hums louder now. The lights turned blue, like the reflection of river water crawling up the walls. I can see my reflection in the one-way glass. She's moving her lips again, half a second after I do. And this time she's smiling. She leans closer to the glass and I hear it. Clear, steady, inevitable. Your turn. The recorder clicks. Then silence. But the tape keeps playing. They tell you in training, never personalize a confession. Keep your tone steady. Keep the boundary clear. But there's a moment, always a moment, when the room shifts, and you realize you're not in control anymore. That moment came for me with patient 43B. I remember the hum of the ceiling vent before I remember his face. That's how therapy works sometimes. You recall the temperature, the sound of recycled air, the tremor of your own pen against paper, because the face becomes something you build out of words later. But that morning, February 6, 2025, the hum felt off. Too rhythmic. Almost like breathing. The clinic was quiet. Thursdays usually are. The winter sun struggled against the frosted windows, making the room seem both bright and dim at once. I'd already seen 4 patients. Anxiety, compulsive habits, trauma follow-up, normal work. By the time I looked at the intake form for 43B, I was already tired enough to miss the small note at the bottom. Request for confidentiality beyond standard parameters. When the door opened, he didn't look like the type who needed therapy. He looked like the type who taught it. Tailored gray coat, clean nails, confident posture, no visible twitch or restlessness, just calm. Elliot Brand, he said, offering a hand. His palm was warm, dry, rehearsed. I smiled. Dr. Melissa Adair. He sat, didn't look around. Most people glance at the bookshelf, the tissue box, the framed degrees. He went straight to the couch, then folded his hands neatly like he was about to present a case study. I'd like to confess something, he said. That word, confess, always changes the air. At first, I assumed religious guilt, or infidelity, or some lingering shame from childhood. But he spoke like an observer, steady, articulate, almost bored. He told me about Cynthia Hall, 37, owner of an antique shop on Birch Avenue. He knew her routines, her habits. He said he followed her for weeks, watched her lock the door each night, gum between her teeth, jingling keys in her left hand. He described her scarf, her perfume, peppermint and cedar. The scar under her chin she hid with foundation. His tone never changed. No hesitation, no pride. Just precision. When he described what he did to her, I felt the clinical part of me rise up. The detached voice that takes notes, timestamps reactions, files things into DSM categories. I wrote fantasy content, potential delusional ideation, possible narcissistic traits. That's what you do to keep distance. But the words stuck to the air like smoke. The way he said them. The sound of her voice failing mid-scream. The pause before the knife met resistance. He didn't blink, and I didn't stop him. When he was done, he leaned forward slightly. His pupils caught the light like a camera lens adjusting focus. None of it's real, he whispered, then smiled. I just wanted to see if I could make you believe it. You passed. After he left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the small red light on the recorder still blinking. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, something subtle, Dry, expensive. I erased the file that night. I told myself it wasn't ethical to keep a delusional confession when it might feed a narcissistic loop. I typed the report. Patient demonstrates advanced manipulative storytelling, recommends observation, non-threatening demeanor. 2 days later, I saw the headline. Local shop owner found dead behind Birch Avenue Antiques. Same name, same wound pattern. I stared at the photo, Cynthia's face smiling from an old Facebook post, and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. I told myself coincidence is common. That's what denial sounds like when you're trained in it. A week passed. The clinic felt heavier. I avoided my reflection in the one-way glass because sometimes I swore I saw him behind it, standing too still, too patient. Then one morning, there was an envelope on my desk. No postage, no handwriting. Just my name, typed. Inside, a single cassette tape. I don't own a cassette player anymore, but the clinic keeps an old one in storage for court cases. I sat in the dim light of my office, rain ticking the window, and pressed play. My own voice filled the room. Calm, professional. Tell me everything. Then his, steady, almost tender. The story was the same, word for word, except this time after describing Cynthia, he added, and then I met someone new. He said my name. I stopped the tape, rewound it, played it again. My stomach turned when I heard the faint scrape of my chair in the background. He'd been recording me while I was recording him. I didn't tell the police. How do you explain something that sounds like paranoia when you're a therapist? I did what we all do. I rationalized. Maybe he'd doctored the tape. Maybe he'd read the report somehow. But every night after that, my office phone rang at exactly 3:09 a.m. No number, no voice, just faint static, like breath between words. One night, I picked up, Elliot? Nothing. Then a whisper. Tell me everything. The next morning, the clinic's IT department called. They'd found a corrupted audio file on the server. My folder. Time-stamped 3:09 a.m. I told them to delete it. They said they already had. But the next day, it was back. Same name, same size, same timestamp. I played it once. The first few seconds were quiet. Then faintly my own voice saying, "He's in the room." I never said that. Not on any recording. That's when I stopped sleeping. When exhaustion hits, perception warps. I began to hear the sound of the ceiling vent again, like slow, deliberate breathing. I began to notice fingerprints on the glass I couldn't have left. Once I found the recorder moved 2 inches from where I left it. Once the phone light blinked for a missed call that didn't exist. I started locking my office door from the inside during sessions. Patients noticed. I blamed construction noise, system errors, caffeine, anything but fear. But it grew. The fear. 3 weeks later, a janitor found another envelope in the hallway outside my office. This one thicker. Inside were photographs, grainy, low-light shots of my sessions, me with patients, me alone, me turning toward the camera, mid-sentence, and one more of me, sleeping in my bed. No one has access to my apartment. No one. I filed a police report. The officer, Detective Madsen, listened carefully, then asked, "You said his name was Elliot Brand?" I nodded. He scribbled something down, paused, then said, "You know that's a registered alias. Belonged to a patient of Ridgeview State Hospital. Died in 2012. I laughed. It came out wrong. Too high. He handed me the file. Black and white mugshot. Hollow eyes, same face. I started hearing my sessions playing faintly through the walls at night. Voices overlapping. Patients confessing. Me responding. Him whispering under it all. The IT department swore no devices were active, but the sound came from behind the drywall, from inside the air vent, from the static hum that never stopped. One night I found a cassette sitting on my chair when I unlocked the office. No envelope this time, just the tape unmarked. I sat down, pressed play, and braced for my voice. It was him again, but he sounded closer, breathing between words. "I told you, truth gets boring. Lies make people honest. He paused. Are you being honest now, Melissa? The tape clicked off. I don't remember driving home that night. I just remember the streetlights smearing through the windshield and the sense that something was already waiting in my apartment. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal, until I saw the small red light blinking on my coffee table. A new recorder. Not mine. When I pressed play, I heard my own heartbeat in the background, fast, uneven. Then his voice. This is session 17. My own voice answered. Tell me everything. I haven't gone back to the clinic since. My voicemail is full of missed appointments and administrative reminders. They still think I'm on leave. Maybe I am. I keep the blind shut, but sometimes I catch movement in the gaps. A shape standing too still on the sidewalk. A reflection that lingers a beat longer than mine. The phone still rings every night at 3:09 a.m. I've stopped answering, but the static is louder now. It feels closer. Last night, I unplugged the phone entirely. Still, at 3:09, it rang. When I picked it up, I didn't hear static. I heard breathing. Then a whisper. Not his voice, but mine. Tell me everything. The line clicked dead. Now, as I sit here, the red light on the recorder blinks again, though I haven't pressed record. I hear the faint hum of the vent above me. It sounds like someone breathing, listening. Maybe confession isn't about guilt at all. Maybe it's about invitation. And I think finally I understand what he meant. Truth gets boring. Lies make people honest. The light blinks twice more, then stops. And in the silence that follows, I hear him say right behind me, "Your turn." I hadn't seen Ben in 12 years. Not since the night we buried what was left of Mara Ellison off the service road outside Glenwood, Colorado. But last week, he found me, outside a grocery store, rain turning his hair into black ropes, eyes hollow like something unfinished. He said, "You've been dreaming it too, haven't you?" I laughed at first because that's what you do when someone digs up the past. You try to make it small. But the sound died in my throat when he described it. The red dress, the half-open mouth, the dirt clinging to her lashes. Things no one should remember. Things I'd been seeing every night. I live in Boulder now, in a one-bedroom apartment that smells like coffee grounds and dust. My life is quiet. Freelance transcription work, morning walks, small rituals that make time manageable. I tell myself the hum of my refrigerator is just the compressor, not something breathing. I tell myself the past was buried deep enough. But lately my dreams are getting louder. They start the same way. I'm standing in the forest. It's the middle of the night, but there's light somewhere, silver and wet, like moonlight filtered through fog. The air smells of iron and pine. I can't see her face, only the red dress, always the red dress, swaying slightly like she's listening. And there's a sound, low and mechanical, like someone trying to breathe through wires. When I wake, the taste of dirt sits on my tongue. The day Ben showed up, I was buying groceries, fruit, bread, small, harmless things. I saw him through the glass door before I recognized him. He looked thinner, older, but the eyes were the same. Dark, alert, like he was cataloging every possible exit. "Liv." I almost dropped the oranges. He smiled like it hurt. "I had to find you." I wanted to run, but curiosity is cruel. It hooks into you before fear can. He asked if we could talk somewhere private. Against better judgment, I said yes. We ended up in the parking lot, rain tapping the hood of his car like impatient fingers. "You remember Mara," he said. I said nothing. "She's not where we left her." It took me a few seconds to process the words. "What the hell are you talking about?" He stared straight ahead. I went back. The markers were gone, the ground's disturbed. I don't know, something's wrong. I've been dreaming her, Liv. Every night. I almost told him I had too, But something about the way he said it, the calmness under the panic, made me lie. "You're imagining things." He looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes I'd seen once before, the night it happened. That flicker, like a light behind glass. "She's dreaming us," he whispered. That night I couldn't stop thinking about him, about her, about how everything we buried was supposed to stay that way. It was 12 years ago, summer 2013. We were 23, Mara, Ben, and me. We'd been inseparable in college. Late nights, cheap beer, the kind of closeness that only works when you believe you'll never hurt each other. Then came that night on the service road. I still tell myself it was an accident. We were driving back from a party outside Glenwood, all of us drunk on adrenaline and music. Mara was in the back seat laughing at something stupid. Ben was driving. The road curved hard, headlights flashing off wet asphalt. Then, impact, the sound of glass, the scream that wasn't mine. When I opened my eyes, she wasn't moving. Ben kept saying, "She's breathing, she's breathing." She wasn't. We panicked. We buried her because we thought we'd be saving our lives. And maybe in a way we did. Until now. The next few days were a blur of half-sleep and buzzing thoughts. I'd wake up at odd hours, 3:07, always 3:07, and the apartment would feel tilted, like the air had weight. Once I thought I heard humming through the vent, a song with no melody, ending mid-note. I started avoiding mirrors. My reflection lagged sometimes just enough to make my stomach drop. On the fourth night, I dreamed again. The forest was darker this time. The trees looked wrong, too close together, their trunks bending toward each other like ribs closing over something. I saw movement ahead. Mara's dress, glinting red in the dark. She turned slowly. Her mouth was open, but the sound that came out was mechanical, like air moving through broken speakers. When I woke, my phone alarm was blaring, though I hadn't set it. The screen said 3:07 a.m. I told myself to get help. I even looked up therapists in Boulder. But every number I dialed, the line clicked dead after the first ring. By Friday, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I called Ben. He answered on the first ring. "I was hoping you'd call." "Ben, what's happening to us?" He exhaled sharply. "I don't know, but I think she wants to finish what we started." "What does that mean?" "She's showing me things. Where she is. I keep waking up with mud under my nails, Liv. Real mud. I think she's close." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. But my hands were shaking. There was dirt beneath my own nails, too. I started writing everything down. The dreams, the smells, the exact times. I thought if I documented it, I could make sense of it. But the entries began repeating themselves, word for word, whole paragraphs reappearing in my handwriting days later. One night, I found a line I didn't remember writing. "You never stopped digging." The next morning, I got a voicemail from Ben. She spoke to me this time. She said one of us has to wake up first. Then static. Then a sound like a shovel scraping rock. When I tried to call back, his number was disconnected. I drove to Glenwood that afternoon. The whole trip, the radio wouldn't stop glitching, songs fading mid-chorus, voices dissolving into low hums. The closer I got, the heavier my chest felt, like altitude sickness made of guilt. The service road was overgrown now, asphalt cracked and littered with pine needles. I parked near where the trees thickened, killed the engine, and sat there until the silence started to hum. The air smelled of wet earth and rust. I walked into the forest, counting my breaths. The ground gave underfoot, soft as breath. When I reached the clearing, I stopped. The dirt was disturbed. A hole half-collapsed, gaping like an open mouth. And beside it, footprints. Fresh ones. Something moved behind me. I turned, expecting Ben, but it was a shape. Vague, too still. Red cloth catching the dim light like a wound. "Mara." It tilted its head. The sound came again. Low, electric, like the forest itself was exhaling. I blinked and she was gone. I drove home shaking. I scrubbed my hands until they bled, but the smell of dirt stayed. That night I taped my mirrors over with newspaper, set alarms every half hour. At 3:07, I woke to the hum again. The lights flickered once, twice. Then the alarm clock went dead. From somewhere in the apartment came the sound of soil shifting. I called out. Ben's name, Mara's, my own. No answer. I turned on my phone flashlight. The beam caught dust floating like ash. Then I saw it, dirt falling from the ceiling vent. A single handprint pressed from the inside of the mirror, the glass bowing slightly, as if something beneath it was breathing. The next morning, the mirror was clean. My phone had a new voicemail. Static. Then a voice. Ben's whispering. She wants me to stay asleep. That was 3 days ago. His number doesn't exist anymore. His apartment's empty. His car's still in the lot. I don't dream of the forest anymore. Now, when I close my eyes, I'm in a room that hums. The walls pulse like a heartbeat. There's a shovel leaning in the corner. Sometimes I pick it up. Sometimes I hear her voice, soft, almost kind. It's your turn, Liv. I don't know if I'm still dreaming, but every morning there's mud on my floor. And sometimes when I blink, I see movement in the corner of the mirror. 2 figures standing side by side in the dark, watching, waiting for me to remember whose hands are holding the shovel. It's not us dreaming her anymore. It's her dreaming what's left of us. They told me never to talk to the patients alone, but some confessions beg to be heard. I'm Claire Benton, 28, psychiatric nurse at Ridgeview Medical Center, 420 Halstead Avenue, Austin, Texas. Night shifts are my penance. Too quiet, too fluorescent, too forgiving. The hallways always hum. Not from people and the patients sleep, the doctors vanish, but from the walls themselves. The building breathes through vents and wiring, sighing like an exhausted body. The first time I noticed it, I told myself it was the HVAC system, but it didn't sound like air. It sounded like whispering just outside the range of words. My badge catches the light of the hallway as I check each door. 17, 18, then 19. Room 19. The door's been sealed for weeks, but I still pause there every night. The air near it feels different, colder, heavier, like the space remembers something it shouldn't. That was before Liam Dorsey arrived. They said he'd been found walking barefoot along a rural road north of the city. No ID, no wallet, wrists covered not in blood, but in ink. Circles, crude symbols, and one word repeated down his forearms. Listen. The admitting psychiatrist, Dr. Patel, said it was a psychotic break. Auditory hallucinations with obsessive delusion, she called it. She said my job was to observe and keep him calm. Nothing more, never alone. But it's hard to follow rules in a place that eats sound. The first night he sat on his bed, back straight, eyes on the intercom above the door. He didn't blink much. When I brought in his dinner tray, dry turkey sandwich, apple, plastic cup of water, he didn't touch it. Liam, I said, soft but firm the way they train us, you need to eat something. He turned his head slightly, not toward me but toward the intercom. Then his lips moved, whispering. Who are you talking to? I asked. He smiled, the slow, eerie kind that doesn't reach the eyes. You hear her now, don't you? I froze. The intercom's red light was off. The line was dead. But I could have sworn I heard something. A faint hiss like static under the hum of the fluorescent light. Feedback, I muttered, mostly to myself. Liam chuckled, low and rasping. She likes you. I left the tray on the table and walked out before he could say anything else. That night, I couldn't sleep during my break. I sat in the nurse's station with coffee gone cold, scrolling through the patient database. Liam Dorsey, 35. No prior psychiatric history, former sound technician, concerts, studios, even did some consulting for radio stations. The notes said his co-workers reported increasing paranoia about frequencies and voices embedded in static. He'd smashed his radio equipment 2 nights before he was found. One officer's statement said Liam claimed she lives in the feedback. The second night, Liam ate half his dinner, but refused to speak until 3 a.m. I remember the time because I'd just marked the vitals log. The whole ward was silent except for the soft crackle of the intercom in his room. I walked to the control panel to check the connection. Every line was off except mine, but the static didn't stop. "Claire," Liam's voice called through the intercom, except he wasn't near the mic. He was sitting on his bed staring straight at the wall. "Liam, go to sleep," I said, my voice sharper than intended. A pause. Then a woman's voice, faint and distorted, whispered back through the speaker. "Confess." I turned the volume knob down. It didn't matter. The sound wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It was behind me. When I looked, no one was there. By the time Dr. Patel arrived for morning rounds, my hands were shaking so badly I had to hide them in my pockets. "You look pale," she said. "Everything all right on the night shift?" "Just tired," I lied. She smiled, distracted, flipping through her clipboard. "Good. We're transferring Dorsey to temporary isolation tonight. Keep your distance." He's showing self-harming behavior again. When I glanced at the note, I saw it. "Listen." Written not in ink this time, but carved faintly into his skin with a piece of plastic cutlery. Night 3. I tried to swap shifts, but no one wanted Ridgeview after midnight. The freak hour, they called it. At 2:45 a.m., I unplugged the intercom in room 19 entirely. I sawed the wire clean with my scissors just to be sure. Still, at 3:14 a.m., that same cursed minute, the static came. I heard it through the vents, the walls, the back of my skull. Then the voice. "Tell me, Claire." I pressed my palms against my ears. "No." From inside the room, Liam laughed, loud, ragged, choking between breaths. I ran in, the emergency key shaking in my hand. He was sitting upright, smiling, the ECG beeping frantically. His fingernails were torn bloody from scratching his skin. Listen covered his arms, chest, throat. "Liam, stop," I shouted, grabbing his wrists. He looked up at me, eyes too wide. She forgave me. Then the monitor flatlined. I swear I heard her voice through the static of the machine. "Now you." The official report called it cardiac arrest from acute stress and exhaustion. I called it something else. I tried to tell Dr. Patel what happened, about the voice, the intercom, the static, but she just placed a hand on my arm and said, "You're overworked, Claire. Take a few days." They moved me to day shifts after that. Routine, sunlight, company, but the walls don't forget. Every morning, when I clock in, I pass room 19. It's sealed now, locked behind yellow tape and a placard that reads, "Maintenance in progress." Still, the red intercom light flickers sometimes. No one else notices. Last Tuesday during lunch, I sat near the break room vent. The static came again, faint, but distinct. I thought I was imagining it until a voice whispered my name, drawn out like a sigh. "Claire." I spilled my coffee. When I looked around, everyone was laughing at some joke on TV. No one else had heard. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go home. I stayed in my car in the parking lot, watching the lights in the upper windows. Room 19's corner glowed dimly every few minutes, like the intercom light trying to blink through the sealed glass. It got worse the next week. I started hearing her voice in different frequencies. The coffee maker, the white noise machine in the staff lounge, even the radio in my car. Always the same words, murmured like a prayer. "Confess." I stopped sleeping. My co-workers began avoiding me, whispering when I passed. I caught snippets. Burnout, psychosis. Maybe she needs a Val. Maybe I do. Because sometimes I catch myself answering the voice back. I don't remember what I say. A few nights ago, I went back. I told myself it was for closure. One last look at the room. The lock was easy. Years of nurses learn a lot about keys. The air inside was stale, metallic, sour with disinfectant. The bed was gone, the walls repainted, but the intercom remained. The red light pulsed faintly, though the power cord still hung loose. I sat on the floor. "All right," I whispered. "You win." Static filled the room, soft as rain. Then her voice came, clear this time, close enough to warm the air against my cheek. "What did you do, Claire?" My throat closed. I hadn't told anyone what happened 3 years ago. The overdose, the wrong dosage, wrong chart, wrong patient. It was my mistake. I switched the labels during a double shift. The man died before morning. The hospital called it clerical error. I'd never said it aloud. Not once. But the voice already knew. "He forgave you," she said. "Now forgive yourself." I started to cry. The sound echoed off the tile until I realized I wasn't the one crying anymore. Something inside the wall was. The sobs rose raw and human, turning into laughter halfway through. Liam's laugh. I stumbled backward. The static followed me out, crawling along the corridor like a spill of sound. The lights flickered. For a second, I saw a shadow behind the glass of room 19. A figure bent over the intercom, whispering into it. They found me in the morning sitting outside the door, muttering that I couldn't turn it off. They said there's no power running to that section of the building. The cables were ripped out months ago, but the maintenance worker swore he heard something through the metal when he checked the wiring. He said it sounded like a woman saying a name. Mine. I'm writing this now from the staff lounge, in daylight, surrounded by chatter and beeping monitors. Everything looks normal, smells normal, feels normal. But beneath it, there's a low hum. It's not the machines. It's her. She doesn't need the intercom anymore. Every time someone speaks, there's a split second of static before their voice comes through. A fraction of distortion, like a breath between words. And I can tell she's learning to use them. Dr. Patel told me she's referring me for a psychological evaluation. She thinks I'm hallucinating. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just tired. Still, before I leave tonight, I'm going to check room 19 one last time. Not to silence it, just to listen. Because sometimes, in the quiet hum between words, I think I finally understand what she's been trying to say all along. It's not about forgiveness. It's about who's listening now. And I think she's in me. I asked them to all sit down before I began. My husband, my daughter, my mother. The kitchen smelled like detergent and rain. The light above the table buzzed like a dying insect. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Sunday, the kind of hour that feels too late for truth but too early for forgiveness. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere distant. Inside, the clock ticked like it was counting down. "What's this about?" my mother asked, suspicion hiding in her tiredness. "Just listen," I said. My voice cracked on the second word. Mark glanced at me from across the table, a faint frown pulling at his mouth. Our daughter Sophie sat sideways in her chair, earbuds dangling from one ear. I could tell she was half texting under the table. Typical teenage distancing, a luxury I thought I was about to take from her forever. "It's not what you think," I began. They didn't know what to think, not yet. "I'm not possessed," I said. "There's nothing evil inside me. Nothing that entered. It's worse than that." Mark's brow creased. My mother's hand hovered over her glass of water but didn't touch it. Sophie looked up, one eye lined with irritation, the other with fear. "You're scaring me," she said. I swallowed. The air felt heavy, damp from the rain, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence like a heartbeat. "This body," I whispered, "isn't mine." They didn't laugh. I think that was the worst part. No one laughed. I told them about Leah Whitmore, 26, the girl who used to live in this body before I took it. She worked at a flower shop on Elm Street, lived alone, liked cold coffee, and sang while driving, and soft, careless, full of life. I knew her name, her habits, her little gestures, because I'd been watching her for months before it happened. I told them how much I hated her, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she was everything I wasn't: kind, ordinary, alive. She had the kind of softness that doesn't know how cruel the world can be. I'd ruined that softness in myself long ago. The night I tried to end it, I didn't die. I remember the smell of bleach, the sound of a bottle hitting the floor, the world spinning, going gray. Then going stillness. I thought that was death. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in my apartment. I was standing beside Leah's bed. She was asleep, breathing slow, peaceful, and I remember thinking, if I can't be free, I'll be her. I don't know how it happened. Maybe some thin layer between us tore. Maybe pain can punch through the rules of the world. I only know that when her eyes opened, they were mine. I woke up the next morning in her body, her life. Her fingers, her voice, her reflection. Everything fit wrong at first, like I was wearing someone else's skin. But it felt better than the one I'd left behind. I learned quickly. Leah's friends thought she'd gone quiet after the flu. Her co-workers at Petal and Stem noticed she didn't hum as much. Her landlord said I seemed different, but he smiled when I paid on time. I built a routine. A second chance. I met Mark a year later, a customer buying flowers for his sister's wedding. He asked me for my number. I remember laughing, light spilling through the shop window, the smell of lilies everywhere. For the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like someone new. Years passed. I married him. We had Sophie. We bought this house, but lately things have been wrong. It started small, mirrors fogging even when the room was cold. I'd wipe them, and for a split second I'd see another face behind mine. Her face. Leah. Then came the flowers. The first bouquet arrived last spring. Wilted white roses, tied with black ribbon, left on our doorstep. No note, just a scrap of paper tucked between the stems. 3 words in shaky handwriting. "You're using my hands." I threw them out. Told myself it was a prank, but more came. Every few weeks, lilies, daisies, even dead sunflowers. Always the same ribbon, the same words. Sometimes left in the mailbox, sometimes on the car seat. Mark thought it was a stalker. We changed locks, installed cameras. Nothing showed up. No deliveries, no faces. Just the flowers appearing where they shouldn't be. Then other things started to shift. Mark began flinching when I touched him. He said my skin felt colder, heavier. Sophie stopped hugging me goodnight. When I asked why, she said, "You don't smell like you anymore." I checked my perfumes, my soaps, everything. The scent was the same, lavender and citrus. But under it, there was something else. A faint sweetness, like cut stems rotting in water. I told them all this now, sitting at the kitchen table. My words poured out too fast, my breath coming in uneven bursts. No one interrupted. "Last night," I said, "I found a photograph of me, the old me, sitting on the counter. Someone had written, 'Give it back' on the back, in my handwriting." My mother pressed her palm against her chest, whispering, "You need help, honey?" Mark's eyes flicked to Sophie, then back to me. "This isn't you talking," he said softly. I almost laughed. Exactly, I thought. But then the light above us flickered. Once, twice, then held steady. Dimmer than before. I looked up, and in the glossy surface of the bulb, I thought I saw movement. A blur, a reflection of a woman standing behind me. When I turned, no one was there. I kept talking anyway, like if I stopped, I'd never start again. "I thought I killed her," I said. "When I crossed, when I took her body, but I think she's been waiting, trying to come back." Sophie's lip trembled. "Mom, please," I wanted to stop. But the truth had already begun spilling, unstoppable, thick and dark like oil. I told them about the dream I'd been having for weeks. In it, I'm back in Leah's flower shop. Everything's reversed. The counter's on the wrong side. The window shows a street that doesn't exist. I'm trimming stems, humming without realizing it. And then I look down and see that my hands aren't moving. They're being moved. Like puppets, a voice whispers, "Stop using what's mine." When I look up, Leah's standing where I should be, wearing my old face, tired, scarred, hollow. She smiles, then she says, "It's my turn. I always wake up to the smell of dirt. Always dirt." Mark tried to reason with me. "It's trauma resurfacing," he said. "You've been under stress," my mother nodded, already scrolling through her phone for therapists, but I could see it in their eyes. A flicker of uncertainty, a small part of them that wondered, what if she's right? That night I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy. The house felt wrong, too still. I went into the bathroom and stared at the mirror. Steam from the shower had fogged it over. I wiped it with my sleeve. For a heartbeat I saw her. Not a reflection, not a trick of light. Her staring back. Same eyes, same mouth, but smiling like she was proud of me for noticing. "Stop," I whispered. The mirror rippled, just slightly, and then she mouthed the words, "Give it back." The next morning, I found dirt under my fingernails. I hadn't been outside. There were muddy footprints leading from the front door to the kitchen sink. Only one set, bare feet smaller than mine. Mark didn't believe me when I showed him. He said maybe Sophie had gone out for the paper. Sophie said she hadn't. That night I heard humming from the living room. The same tune Leah used to hum while trimming flowers. When I checked, the room was empty, except for a single vase on the coffee table. Inside it were wilted lilies tied with black ribbon. Water dripped slowly from the stems, puddling on the wood. The note tucked beneath read, "Almost time." That's when I knew I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. So I called them to the table and told them everything. When I finished, I couldn't look at them. My voice felt raw, my throat dry, silence stretched. Then my husband finally spoke. His voice was calm, too calm. "Then whose body do you think this is?" For a second I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" He didn't blink. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then whose body do you think this is?" Something in his tone changed, deeper, almost mocking. When I looked up, his eyes weren't right. They were glassy, like marbles half filled with water. Sophie's mouth hung slightly open. My mother's head tilted at an odd angle. They all just stared. And then, one by one, they smiled. The kitchen light flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. The sound that followed wasn't thunder. It was breathing. Too close, too many lungs moving at once. I reached for my phone, but the screen showed only static. Faint, colorless faces shifting beneath the pixels. I whispered, "Leah?" No one answered, but in the window's reflection I saw her, standing behind me, hand resting gently on my shoulder. Her face pale, calm, patient. She leaned close until her breath fogged the glass. "You wore me well," she whispered. Her voice came from inside my throat. I don't remember falling, but I must have. When I opened my eyes, the kitchen was bright again. Morning light slanting through the blinds. The chairs were empty. The table spotless. Mark, Sophie, my mother, gone. Only the smell of flowers remained and a note, folded neatly where I'd been sitting. "You're done borrowing. For days I searched for them. Police reports. Missing persons flyers." The neighbors said they'd seen us at dinner the night before, laughing. They said I looked happy. Said my daughter waved from the porch. I check the mirrors now before I sleep. Sometimes I see them, not behind me, but inside the reflection. Faintly alive, Mark's eyes, my mother's smile, Sophie's hand pressed against the glass. All of them watching. And every time I blink, the reflection lags. Just a second. Long enough for me to see Leah move independently. Long enough to know she's still here. The house feels colder each night. The walls breathe when the lights go out. The pipes groan like someone whispering through metal. I keep the windows open, hoping the rain will drown out the sound. It doesn't. It only makes it worse again, because now, when it rains, I hear humming beneath it. A woman's voice, soft and steady. Leah's tune. I don't know how long I can hold her off. I feel her under my skin, tightening like vines. My fingers twitch when I sleep. My heartbeat stutters in rhythms that aren't mine. Last night, I caught myself in the bathroom mirror again. She was closer this time, our faces perfectly aligned. No gap, no distinction. "You took my life," she said without sound. I reached toward the glass. Her hand met mine. The surface rippled, and for a moment, I felt warmth again, familiar, human, before realizing it wasn't mine. I'm writing this in the kitchen now, the same place I confessed it all. The clock reads 9:47 p.m. Again, rain outside. Same rhythm, I can hear footsteps upstairs, soft, measured. 3 pairs at once, Mark, Sophie, my mother. They're humming too. I should be afraid. I'm not, maybe because it feels fair. Maybe because I never really belonged here. The air smells of detergent and rain. The bulb above me buzzes like a dying insect. I can see my reflection in the window, smiling faintly. And just as the light flickers once, then goes out, I realize something. She's not stealing me back. She's letting me see what it feels like to be the ghost. The darkness hums with breath, with warmth, with the sound of flowers being cut underwater. Someone whispers, "Welcome home." And in that black glass reflection, I swear I see her smile using my teeth. I never meant for anyone to read it. It was just supposed to be between me and the screen. I'm Haley Ross, 32, copy editor from Rochester, New York, and I used to believe that writing things down made them smaller, containable. That's what therapy told me, what journaling apps promised, name it to tame it. But grief doesn't shrink when you name it. It just learns how to spell itself. When I first joined ConfessMe.net, I wasn't looking for absolution. I was looking for quiet. The kind that comes from typing into the void. No eye contact, no judgment. Just anonymous usernames floating in digital limbo. People posted everything there, stolen money, affairs, betrayals. They called it digital penance. I called it insomnia therapy. The site was bare bones. Black background, white text, a single blinking cursor under the prompt. What's something you've never told anyone? My first post was small, harmless even. I think I caused someone's death. I didn't expect replies. Usually confessions sink fast, buried under hundreds of others. But within minutes, I had dozens of notifications. Most said things like, "You're brave," or "We've all been there." But one username kept appearing again and again. Mercy 5 and 6. Their first comment was simple. "Tell me everything. I'll listen." There was something about that, not "it's okay," not "you're forgiven," just "I'll listen." It felt human, or close enough. At first I typed short things, testing the current. That Liam had been my ex. That we'd broken up 6 months before he died. That I still had his toothbrush. Then I told them about the night. The pills. The bathtub. How I didn't call for help soon enough. I remember that silence after the water stilled. The clock said 3:02 a.m. When I hit post, my hands were shaking so hard I misspelled my own name. Within seconds, Mercy replied, "It's okay. He forgave you." It felt impossible, like they'd been waiting to say it. The more I wrote, the easier it got. I'd come home from work, open my laptop, pour myself a drink, and start typing into the dark. It became routine, like prayer, only worse. Every night around the same time, 3 a.m., I'd see that small gray bubble. Mercy 560 was typing. They always knew what to ask. Not too much, not too soon. What did he say before you left? Did you mean to stay gone that long? Do you still hear him? And every time I finished a post, I felt a little lighter, like I'd dropped another stone into a bottomless well. Until one night, when Mercy wrote something new. "You should see him again. He's waiting." I laughed out loud. Typed back, "You sound like one of those spiritual grief scammers." They replied instantly, "I'm not scamming you. I'm just giving him your words." I didn't answer. I logged off. Closed the laptop. The next morning I woke to an email from Liam's old Gmail address, the one deleted months ago. Subject, confession received. The message was blank, except for a single timestamp, 2 a.m. I froze, staring at the screen until the reflection blurred. Maybe someone hacked it. Maybe Mercy found his email somehow. But that address had been permanently removed. I'd watched the deletion process myself. I tried to rationalize it. Data glitch, old auto-forward, cached metadata. I even looked up how long deleted accounts stay in recovery. It said 30 days. Liam had been gone for 2 years. When I checked Confess Me again, my thread was gone. In its place was a new post under Mercy 560. She told me everything. Inside were my words. Every line. Even the ones I'd deleted before posting. But each one now ended differently. Where I'd written, "I think I caused his death," it now said, "I caused his death." Now I belong to him. I reached out to the site's moderator, a user named Admin J who handled content disputes. They replied, Polite and robotic. There's no user registered as Mercy560. Could be a mirrored cache or deleted account. Try clearing cookies, I did. Nothing changed. I stopped posting for a few weeks, hoping distance would dull the unease. It didn't. The longer I stayed offline, the louder my head got. At work, I'd catch myself staring at the cursor in Word documents, that same pulsing line, and feel my pulse sinking to it. I started sleeping in the living room. My bedroom felt crowded, though no one was there. The air carried that faint chemical smell, like wet electronics, ozone after lightning. Every night at 3:02, my phone lit up. No message. Just a blinking notification that disappeared when I touched it. Once, I unplugged the Wi-Fi router before bed. Still at 3:02, my laptop woke itself. The fan whirred. The screen glowed faint blue, and my reflection blinked once before I did. When I told my therapist, she said it sounded like complicated grief. She suggested deleting my accounts entirely. Let the ghost go, she said, not realizing the cruelty in that phrasing, so I did. I deleted everything, confess me, social media, even old drives with photos of Liam. But that night my inbox refilled itself. No subject lines, just drafts, unsent emails addressed to him. Each one began with Dear Haley and ended with a timestamp. 3:02, my best friend Renee came by one evening, concerned. She was all practical energy, a nurse, grounded, real. She poured wine, opened curtains, laughed too loud. Girl, you've got to stop wallowing in haunted internet corners. I nodded, pretending I believed her. But while she was in the bathroom, my laptop pinged. A new notification from unknown and confessme.net subject. Renee knows too much. I slammed the lid shut. My chest went cold hollow. When Renee came back, she saw my face and frowned. What happened? I lied, said it was work. Said I'd just gotten bad feedback on a project. Later, when she left, I checked again. The email was gone. But under sent, I saw one that I didn't write. Sent at 3:02 a.m. the night before. To her. Subject, do you believe in second chances? I stopped sleeping. I unplugged everything, phone, router, even the clock. But screens have a way of coming back. On the fourth night, the laptop powered on by itself again, bathing the room in that sick aquarium light. The site was open, a new thread, under my name this time. Title, Confession number 2, she's almost ready. The body text was live. I could see it updating in real time, lines appearing one by one. She's awake, she's remembering the water, she's typing even though she's not touching the keys. I tried to close it. Nothing responded. The screen flickered black to white to black again. Then for half a second I saw his face, Liam's, reflected over mine. Wet hair. Half smile. Eyes open underwater. When it vanished, the cursor kept blinking. I took the laptop to Dave's tech repair. The next morning, a strip mall shop run by a guy in a hoodie who looked like he lived off Monster energy drinks and bad sleep. He checked the system logs, muttering, "Weird stuff. Someone's remote mirroring your keystrokes. Can you find who?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I meant. He shook his head. No IP history. Just a loopback, like it's coming from your own device. When I asked what that meant, he looked at me uncertain. Means it's not connecting to the internet at all. That night I left the laptop in the trunk of my car, slept with my phone off, doors locked. Still woke up at 3:02. The car alarm blared outside, sharp and panicked. When I opened the trunk, the laptop screen was on, glowing faint white, text scrolling, line by line. She left me alone again. She doesn't understand mercy. She's still mine. I hurled it onto the pavement. It cracked, but didn't die. The screen just kept blinking that cursor. I moved apartments 2 weeks later. New place, new number, new everything. Renee helped me unpack, bless her. She was careful not to mention Liam, not to ask about Confess Me. When she left, I promised I'd call, but I didn't. For a while it worked. The nights were quieter. The air didn't buzz. I started thinking maybe it was grief all along, the kind that eats from the inside, makes ghosts out of guilt. Then one morning, my work laptop and a completely different one showed a desktop notification, a single unread message from Mercy, 60 subject. Confession received, timestamp 3:02 a.m. I opened it, blank. Then words appeared slowly, like someone typing live. He's here too. I started writing this final confession, because I thought putting it down might end it. That maybe if I finish the story, he'll let me stop. But I've been typing for hours, and the cursor hasn't stopped moving even when my hands do. Sometimes I see double letters appear, like he's helping, like we're co-authors again. I don't know what mercy is. A person, a code, a consequence. But they were right about one thing. Confession doesn't cleanse. It calls something up, something that listens. I can hear the hum now. It's inside the walls like static before a storm. Every outlet glows faintly blue. The air smells like wet circuits and something sweet underneath. The scent of Liam's old shampoo. I unplugged the router. Pulled the plug out of the wall. The light's still on, the cursor is still blinking. He's still typing. She finally told the truth. Now she belongs to me. The screen flickers. My reflection blinks before I do. I shouldn't have told him. Some truths rot better in silence. The night I said it, the storm over Asheville, North Carolina was tearing the sky apart. Thunder rolling low and patient. Lightning bleaching the kitchen tiles in white. Evan sat across from me at the small oak table we'd bought secondhand the year we got married. His phone face down, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hair was damp from the rain. The smell of wet earth came in through the cracked window. "I think I killed the real you," I said. He laughed first, a startled, nervous sound. But when I didn't laugh back, his face changed. His eyes flicked from my mouth to my hands, then to the window, like he was waiting for someone else to tell him what to do. "You're serious?" "I don't know." The lights flickered once, the storm rumbling above us like it was trying to wake something buried. I remember how he reached for his coffee mug, missed it by an inch, then finally looked at me fully. "What does that even mean, Tiffany?" It was the first time I'd said his name out loud since dinner began. The sound of it felt wrong in my mouth, too smooth, like a word rehearsed. The truth had been fermenting in me for 9 years, since the night on Old Mill Road, 2016, early spring when rain smelled of iron and pine. He'd been driving, or maybe I had. Memory folds in on itself when you stop trusting it. I remember headlights cutting through fog, a deer bolting, a swerve, metal screaming, then nothing but rain on glass. I remember his body half outside the driver's side door, head tilted, eyes open but not seeing. Blood in the corner of his mouth. Then I blinked and he stood, whole, smiling, unhurt. "Guess we were lucky," he'd said. His voice steady, soft. We never talked about it again. The years after blurred into a rhythm: work, dinner, bed. Evan ran a small carpentry business, came home smelling of cedar and varnish. I worked at a private clinic downtown, administrative staff. We didn't fight, not really. We didn't dream either. Or at least he didn't. When I asked what he dreamed about, he'd say, "I don't remember." Every time, same tone, same words, as if the answer had been stored somewhere inside him and played back on command. I told myself it was normal. People forget dreams. People change after accidents. People move on. But sometimes I'd catch him standing by the window at 2 or 3 a.m., staring at the streetlights perfectly still. When I asked what he was doing, he'd say, "Listening." To what, he never said. That night at the table, I told him everything. About the car, the flash of light, the wrongness that followed. How he'd never limped again, though the impact should have shattered his knee. How his reflection in the living room window once blinked a half-second late. He said nothing. I reached across the table. His hand was warm, too warm, like blood moving too fast. "You don't forget things anymore," I whispered. "You don't even sneeze. Do you realize that?" He smiled, tight and practiced. "Tiffany, you're tired." "Then tell me your last dream." Silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the rain against glass. Finally he said, "Why does it matter?" "Because you don't sleep," I thought. "Because you're pretending to breathe. Because sometimes I hear you whisper my name when you think I'm asleep. Like you're reminding yourself how to say it." But out loud I said, "It just does." He stood suddenly, the chair scraping across the tile. "If you really believe that," he said, "then who am I right now?" The question wasn't angry. It was afraid, and that scared me more than anything else. because as he spoke, the storm seemed to pause, thunder holding its breath, the air thick, electric. The sound of his voice was right, but the shape of it felt copied. He reached out, fingers trembling. "Tiffany," he said softly. "Touch me. Feel that I'm real." I wanted to. I really did. But something in me, deep, primal, recoiled. He saw it, and the look on his face broke something between us. After that night, we didn't talk about it. He went to work each morning, same smile, same goodbye kiss, but I started noticing things. Subtle. Off. His shirts, always perfectly folded. Too perfect. The creases aligned like blueprints. The way he moved and every step measured identical. Once he dropped a glass in the kitchen. It shattered, sharp against tile. He stared at the shards for a long time before crouching, and when he picked one up, his finger split open, a clean slice on, but no blood came. Just a faint sheen like condensation. I didn't say a word. That night he held me in bed, his breath warm on my neck. "Tell me I'm still me," he whispered. I said nothing. When I woke hours later, he was still there, eyes open, unblinking, watching. Days blurred. I started hearing things, low murmurs when the house settled, static under the radio when I drove. At work, the copier printed blank pages that smelled faintly of smoke. Once, when I was washing dishes, I looked up and saw our wedding photo on the counter, except his face was turned slightly away, just enough that I couldn't see his eyes. I told myself I was imagining it, but imagination doesn't leave footprints. On Thursday morning, I found mud on his side of the bed, dried, streaked across the sheets. That same morning, outside the window, tire tracks led from the driveway into the woods. He said he'd gone out early to clear a fallen branch from the road. But his truck was spotless. I started keeping notes, little observations, like an experiment. April 9th. He didn't blink for 40 seconds during breakfast. April 10th. Called me by my full name twice. He never does that. April 12th. Asked what my favorite song is. We danced to it at our wedding. April 13th. Door to the garage open at 3 a.m. He said he was checking for leaks. Each entry felt like a confession. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Then one evening I came home to find my notebook gone. He was in the kitchen cooking, the smell of onions and garlic heavy in the air. "Lose something?" he asked. My throat went dry. "Did you take it?" He tilted his head. "Take what?" "The notebook." He turned off the stove, stepped closer. "Why would I do that?" "Because it's gone," he smiled. "Maybe you misplaced it." His tone was calm, but his hands were trembling. I wanted to scream, to push past him, to run, but the air felt thick, pressing against my skin. "You think I'm crazy," I said. He looked at me for a long time. "No," he whispered. "I think you're starting to see." I didn't sleep that night. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the hallway clock, the faint creak of wood as the house breathed. Around 2:14 a.m., I heard movement downstairs. Slow, deliberate, I crept to the landing. The kitchen light glowed faintly. Evan stood by the back door, his reflection warped in the glass. He was whispering. At first I thought he was praying, but then I realized he was repeating something and my name, over and over like a mantra. "Tiffany, Tiffany, Tiffany." The voice from his mouth and the one in the reflection weren't in sync. I don't remember running back to the bedroom, only waking hours later to sunlight cutting across the floor. His side of the bed empty. He didn't come home that night. By morning, the tire tracks in the driveway were deeper. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. Called his shop. They said he hadn't shown up. By noon, I drove to Old Mill Road. The forest there still smelled the same. Pine, wet soil, something metallic underneath. The crash site was long overgrown, moss reclaiming what we'd tried to forget. I parked by the guardrail and walked down the slope. The air felt heavier there, half buried in the mud. I found it, a strip of fabric, dark blue, frayed at the edges. The same color as the flannel he'd worn that night 9 years ago. I don't remember picking it up or driving home, only the way my hands shook on the steering wheel and how every song on the radio dissolved into static. He returned 2 days later, walked in through the front door like nothing happened, carrying groceries. "Hey," he said, You look pale. Where were you? Work, I stared at him. They said you never showed. He paused, a flicker of something crossing his face. Maybe they forgot. He unpacked the groceries. Apples, milk, bread, and all brand new, all sealed, no receipts. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw headlights, fog, the curve of a smile through broken glass. The next morning, I called Dr. Morgan, my old therapist. I need help, I told her. Her voice was calm, measured. What's happening, Tiffany? I think my husband isn't my husband. Silence. Can you elaborate? I told her everything. The accident, the years of small wrongs, the warmth of his skin, the absence of blood. When I finished, she said, "You sound frightened." I am. Do you think you might be projecting your trauma from the crash onto him? I almost laughed. So you think it's my fault? No, she said softly. I think grief takes strange shapes when left unresolved. I hung up before she could say more. That evening, Evan cooked dinner again. Chicken, mashed potatoes. The smell should have been comforting. It wasn't. He sat across from me, eating slowly, watching. You called Dr. Morgan, he said finally. My fork froze midair. How did you? She left a message on the machine. I listened. He set his knife down, wiped his hands carefully. Do you think I'm wrong? I couldn't answer. Because if I am, he continued, voice barely above a whisper, then what does that make you? I pushed my chair back, heart hammering. What are you talking about? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You think you buried me, Tiffany, but maybe you buried yourself. I left that night, threw clothes into a bag, grabbed my keys, drove until the mountains turned into mist in the rearview mirror, checked into a motel off I-26, Pine Hollow Inn. The sheets smelled of bleach. The neon sign outside flickered through the curtains. I didn't sleep. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind like someone whispering at the window. At 3 a.m., the phone rang, static, then his voice. Come home, he said. I dropped the receiver. The next morning, I found tire tracks outside the motel room. I went to the police station in town. Spoke to a young officer who looked barely out of college. I think someone's following me, I said. Name? Tiffany Danner. He typed something into his computer, frowned. Ma'am, can you spell that again? I did. He squinted at the screen. It says here, Tiffany Danner died in 2016. Car accident on Old Mill Road. My stomach dropped. That's not possible. He turned the monitor toward me. There it was, my name. My birth date of death. I stumbled out of the station before he could stop me. Outside, the air smelled like rain. I drove back to Asheville. To him, the house looked smaller, quieter. The curtains drawn, he was in the kitchen waiting. You came back, he said gently. I saw something, I whispered. At the station, he nodded, almost relieved. I was hoping you'd understand. What are you? I asked. He stepped closer, eyes dark, soft. I'm what was left when you stopped breathing. My chest tightened. That's not true, he smiled sadly. You were gone, Tiffany. I pulled you out, or maybe you pulled me. I don't know anymore. But one of us had to keep living. He reached out, touched my face. His hand was warm, familiar, human. Tell me I'm still me, he whispered. Tears burned my eyes. I don't know who either of us is. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but coming closer. He leaned his forehead against mine. Then maybe we both died that night. That was 3 days ago. I've been alone since. Or maybe not. Sometimes I hear footsteps upstairs, slow and deliberate. Sometimes the mirror shows two of me, one half a second behind. Last night I dreamed, or thought I did, that I was driving down Old Mill Road again. Rain, headlights, fog. In the passenger seat sat Evan, or the version that came after. He turned to me, smiling. We made it, he said. When I looked at my hands on the wheel, they weren't hands at all. Just light, flickering. I woke to mud on my feet and the smell of rain. This morning, the tire tracks are back, leading away from the house, disappearing into the trees. And in the kitchen, the coffee is still warm, but I don't remember making it. Sometimes I wonder if I buried the wrong one that night, or if maybe he buried me first. The lie that made us human, he asked me to stay after class that night, just me. The others had gone, leaving the lecture hall echoing with the faint hum of the projector cooling down. The rain outside sounded like static over the old windows, and the fluorescent lights flickered once before settling into that dull, migraine kind of white. Dr. Henry Vance sat at his desk, hands folded, looking like he was about to confess something rather than teach it. I remember the smell first. Chalk and old paper, but under it, a faint metallic tang like rain hitting rust. "You've always asked the right questions, Nora," he said. His voice cracked slightly on my name, a sound that made me feel both proud and afraid. "So tonight I'll tell you the wrong answer." At first I thought he was joking. He had that kind of dry humor professors wear like armor, but his face didn't move. He just watched me, eyes trembling slightly in their sockets. Then he asked, "Do you believe in the invention of fire?" It was November at Boston University, and I was 21, majoring in archaeology with a minor in anthropology. I'd been one of Vance's research assistants for a year. He was famous in a quiet, cultish way. His book, The Cognitive Spark, The Birth of Symbolic Thought, was required reading in half the anthropology departments in the country. He was brilliant and lonely, the kind of man who lived on coffee, nicotine gum, and the past. He had a reputation for disappearing, weeks, sometimes months, then returning with sunburn and some half-buried artifact wrapped in linen. I thought it made him fascinating. Back then I wanted to be him. That night, though, I started to think maybe no one should. I mean the event itself, he said. The first flame, the birth of control. He smiled faintly like something in the sentence amused him. Then the smile collapsed. "It never happened, Nora." I laughed before I could stop myself. "You mean like it's symbolic, a myth?" "No." His eyes were wet now, bloodshot. "I mean there was no first fire. There was no discovery. There was only escape." He unrolled a parchment from his briefcase, brittle, yellowed, with drawings that didn't make sense. No animals, no tools, just spirals. Endless hand-drawn spirals, black fading into red. The longer I stared, the more they seemed to move. Over the next week, he started keeping me after class more often. Always at night. Always with that same hum of the projector, that smell of dust and ozone. He'd show me fragments, stone tablets, photographs, linguistic diagrams that all seemed to trace back to the same idea. Something older than human cognition. One night, he said it plainly. We weren't supposed to think in lines, or build or remember. The pattern was always a spiral. The universe thinks in spirals. He was shaking as he spoke, chalk trembling in his hand as he drew a looping shape across the blackboard. And then, he whispered, something burned its way out. Thought collapsed inward, heat became shape. That's when we appeared. A containment strategy. We were made to hold it. I told him it sounded like a myth. He said, every myth is a trauma response. Around that time, I started dreaming about spirals. Not seeing them, being them. The dream smelled like burned hair and dirt after lightning. When I woke, my fingertips were black with what I thought was ink. It wouldn't wash off until morning. I told myself it was stress. Grad school tends to warp your sense of reality. But then the files began to change. I'd cataloged dozens of digital scans for Vance, ancient carvings, site photos, linguistic transcriptions. One night I noticed small distortions in the images, spirals forming in the corners. At first I thought it was JPEG artifacting, some compression issue, but the pattern was too deliberate. I asked him about it. He just smiled. It's remembering itself. 2 days later, he didn't show up to class. Campus police came that evening, sealing off the anthropology wing. They said there'd been a gas leak in his office. A small explosion. No one injured. No body found. I didn't believe it, but I wanted to. They let me retrieve my things from the lab 3 days later. The air reeked of smoke and disinfectant. The walls were scorched, but the chalkboard survived. 6 words written in ash. The truth doesn't need a spark. For weeks, I tried to move on. I told myself the man had lost his mind. I even saw a counselor the university recommended. She told me I was processing trauma through intellectual fixation, but the dreams got worse. The spiral was no longer static. It turned, always counterclockwise, always drawing inward. I started to wake with burn marks on my palms, faint, like I'd pressed them against something hot in my sleep. Then one morning, my computer turned itself on. No login screen, just a single image, a satellite photo of a field. The soil was scorched black in concentric rings. A timestamp read November 17, 2025, 4:12 a.m. Turkey. Near Göbekli Tepe. I traced the image metadata. It wasn't faked. It had come from an academic server at Harvard, from an address belonging to a Dr. James O'Malley. I recognized the name. He'd been Vance's rival, famously calling his last paper a fever dream dressed as anthropology. I emailed him. I don't know what I expected. Maybe an academic explanation that would make everything rational again. He replied within an hour. If you're contacting me about Vance, don't. He's dead. Let it go. Then a second email followed, 2 minutes later. Actually, come to my office tomorrow, 2 p.m. Don't bring electronics. The next day I took the train to Cambridge. His office was on the top floor of a narrow, overlit building that smelled of antiseptic and printer toner. Dr. O'Malley looked older than his photos, gray stubble, shaking hands, red-rimmed eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. Did he show you the spirals? He asked before I'd even sat down. I nodded. He laughed, dry and terrified. Of course he did. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, hundreds of aerial shots from across the world, deserts, fields, even ocean floors. Each burned or etched with spirals. Since 2019, he said. They're increasing. Self-similar geometry. Radiocarbon signatures inconsistent with human combustion. No ignition source. Why show me this? I whispered. Because you worked with him. You might have seen something. Or caught it. Caught what? He looked at me then. And for the first time I saw the whites of his eyes were tinged faintly orange. The remembering, he said. It spreads through recognition. I left the office shaking. The sky over the Charles River looked wrong, too bright, like the color temperature had shifted. I told myself I was hallucinating, that it was exhaustion. But that night my apartment lights flickered every time I looked at my hands. By midnight, the heat came back, the fever under my skin, just like when Vance grabbed my wrist. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed I was underground, a spiral carved through rock, curling endlessly inward until it reached something glowing. It wasn't fire. It was alive, and it knew my name. Over the following days, my phone began to glitch. Texts from unknown numbers. Do you believe yet? When I tried to block them, my contacts disappeared, every name erased except one. Henry Vance. The number had no area code, I called it. At first, only static. Then breathing. Slow, uneven. Then a whisper. It's never gone out, Nora, just dimmed. I threw the phone against the wall, but when I looked back at the screen, it had changed. A photo, my apartment window, taken from outside. By then, sleep was impossible. The city felt wrong, stretched thin. Streetlights pulsed like dying hearts. The people around me seemed distant, out of sync, every blink half a second late. I started spending nights in the library basement, surrounded by books that still smelled human. I researched everything: combustion myths, prehistoric ritual fires, entropy, recursion. Every path led back to the same symbol. The spiral wasn't just ancient, it was recursive in human art, architecture, even our DNA. That's when it hit me. The spiral was memory. We hadn't invented fire. Fire had condensed into thought. The human brain, our warmth, our self-awareness was the containment, and maybe it was reaching its limit. The blackout came 3 nights later. Boston went dark. For hours, the only light came from the rain sparking off transformers. The air smelled like burning dust. When the lights came back, the sky was red. I don't mean sunset red, I mean molten bruised red, pulsing faintly like breath behind clouds. The news called it atmospheric scattering. But people started burning without fire, just glowing, fever under the skin. Hospitals overflowed with patients suffering from photothermal reactions. I knew better. The quarantine was failing. I tried to run to leave the city, but every road out was blocked by police and National Guard. They said the radiation was localized. They said stay calm. From the overpass, I saw the spirals. In the fields beyond the Charles, black rings burning in silence. The world was remembering itself. Now I'm writing this in the dark of my apartment, laptop battery at 3%. The power grid keeps flickering, and every time it does, the room gets a little warmer. There's ash on my desk, not from a candle, not from anything burning. It just appears. Outside, the sky glows steady now. No clouds, no stars. Just read. I keep thinking of what Vance said. The invention of fire is humanity's first lie. Maybe we weren't the ones who found it. Maybe it found us. Maybe consciousness was the ember and now the oxygen's run out. The walls hum. My veins hum. The truth doesn't need a spark. It only needs a witness. And I think I've finally become one. Long before the pale yellow house on Hawthorne Ridge, long before the boxes in the attic and the magnolia petals that still show up in my mailbox, I used to believe I understood danger. I grew up with a father who thought love meant surveillance, tracking my phone, questioning my friends, calling every hour, just to make sure you're safe. I promised myself I'd never allow anyone to own my breathing again. I thought I'd built thick enough walls. I thought I'd learned how to choose better. That was before Ethan, before the creaking floors and the late-night whispers, before I started doubting the sound of my own footsteps and the shape of my own reflection. I didn't know then that danger doesn't always kick down doors. Sometimes it walks in wearing a soft smile and leaves flowers on the kitchen table. Sometimes it speaks quietly, lovingly, until you mistake obsession for care. And by the time you realize what's happening, you've already been erased from your own life. I first met Ethan at a school fundraiser where he taught 8th grade history, and I volunteered in the art booth. He was the kind of man people described as gentle. Low voice, thoughtful pauses, the sort of steady energy you think will hold your storms instead of creating them. He laughed when I knocked over a jar of paint water and told me I had an artist's clumsiness. I remember liking how easy he made everything feel. No pressure, no intensity, just comfort. We dated for a year before marrying, and during that year I told myself I had never known calm like this. Ethan remembered my coffee order, my fear of thunderstorms, the way I panicked when someone walked too closely behind me. He listened. He cared. He watched. Not in the way my father once had, but in a way that felt like devotion. When we bought the Colonial on Hawthorne Ridge, I convinced myself it was the beginning of something stable. The house had wide windows, a wraparound porch, and floors that whispered under our feet. Old houses breathe, Ethan told me. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The first month I started waking up at strange hours. Sometimes it was the click of a door latch, sometimes the shift of air like someone stepping out of a room. I always found Ethan standing in the doorway moments later, his silhouette soft in the hallway light. "You called my name," he'd whisper. "No," I'd say, throat tight and dry. "I didn't." He'd smile gently, like he knew better. "You must have been dreaming. Come here, sweetheart." I'd let him wrap an arm around me because admitting the truth, that something felt wrong, felt too close to the fears I thought I'd escaped. His protectiveness, once sweet, began to thread itself through every corner of my life. He memorized my work schedule down to the minute. He texted constantly, asking where I was, who I was with, why I hadn't answered yet. He insisted on driving me to and from the library where I worked. "Nights are dangerous," he'd say. "I just want to make sure you're safe." One afternoon after work, I found a small slip of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. "You look tired at 3:42 p.m. today." I crumpled it with a laugh, brushing it off as some stupid prank. But that night, Ethan mentioned how exhausted I'd looked when he drove past the library around 3-something. My pulse tightened. "Why were you there?" "Just checking on you," he said. "You seemed worn out." I swallowed my unease. What was I supposed to say? That it felt like a warning instead of affection? As autumn settled into the cracks of the house, the wrongness grew thicker. I began hearing faint whispers near the bathroom mirror. Not words at first, just my name dragged out in a breathy sigh. I'd step into the hallway and see nothing. I'd check the locks twice, then 3 times, and still wake to find a door cracked open. "Old houses make noise," Ethan reminded me again. "Don't scare yourself." But fear wasn't the problem. It was doubt. Doubt that I could trust what I heard. Doubt that I could trust myself. One night, as fog pressed against the windows like hands, I told Ethan, "I hear things. Someone whispering my name." He brushed a thumb across my cheek, sympathetic, concerned, too concerned. "You've always been anxious," he murmured. "You grew up with fear. I'll help you. Just come to me when it happens." For a moment, I believed him. I let myself fold into his reassurance, stupidly grateful that someone cared enough to explain my fears away. I didn't realize he was rewriting my reality one soft sentence at a time. Everything changed the day I found the boxes. I hadn't meant to open the wall panel in the attic. I was searching for holiday decorations when a loose piece of molding caught my sleeve and popped open. Behind it sat 3 wooden boxes lined neatly in a row. My stomach knotted before I even touched them. Something in me already knew. The first box was filled with photos. Thousands of them. Me walking to school at 16. Me at the grocery store in a hoodie. Me sitting in a cafe reading a book years before I met Ethan. The second box held more. Me sleeping in my college dorm. Me unlocking the door to my old apartment. Me through windows that should have been shut. My breath fractured as I opened the third box. Inside were cassette tapes labeled with dates and words like breathing, crying, shower sounds. I sat frozen, air burning my lungs, realization slicing through every memory I'd ever shared with him. Ethan hadn't simply loved me. He'd been watching me long before I ever learned his name. When he came up to check on me, I held one of the photos out with a shaking hand. "What is this?" His expression didn't change. No guilt, no panic. He just smiled. A slow, warm smile that made my bones feel hollow. "You don't understand," he said gently. "I'm protecting you from everything that might harm you." He stepped closer, voice soft as a lullaby. "Including yourself." I backed away so fast I hit the attic railing. "You've been stalking me for years. I've been watching over you," he corrected. "If you knew how easily harm finds you, you'd thank me." I ran before he could say anything else. Down the stairs, out the door, into the cold night air. I didn't pack. I didn't think. I just drove until the yellow house became nothing but a fading shape in my rearview mirror. I moved 3 states away within a month. New apartment, new locks, new therapist, new life. But new doesn't mean untouched. The first envelope arrived on a Wednesday. No return address. Inside was a single magnolia petal, Ethan's favorite scent. The next envelope came 2 weeks later, this time with a blurry photo of me reaching for my blinds. The third showed me reading on my couch, alone, convinced no one knew where I lived. I called the police, but without proof of who sent them, there was nothing they could do. Now I sleep with lights on in every room. I keep furniture pressed against doors. I cover mirrors at night because sometimes, just for a second, I think I see a figure standing behind me. Some nights, when the house settles, I hear faint footsteps in the hallway. Not loud, just enough to make me freeze. Just enough to make me remember that safety is a fragile thing. People ask if the Hawthorne Ridge house was haunted. I tell them yes, but not by ghosts. Ghosts don't memorize your schedule. Ghosts don't take pictures of you sleeping. Ghosts don't whisper your name through the walls. That was Ethan. It was always him. And no matter how far I run, I'm still learning what it means to unlearn fear. To rebuild a sense of self he tried so patiently to erase. Love is never measured by how closely someone watches you, but by how freely they let you breathe. Control is not protection, and fear disguised as affection is still fear. Trust the voice inside you that whispers when something feels wrong, even when someone insists it isn't. The house was quieter than it should have been for a family the size of ours. Snow fell hard that winter, blanketing the yard and filling in the familiar dents in the driveway until everything looked smooth and innocent. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked like a metronome, marking out the small cruelty of ordinary days. Eliza hummed while she packed lunches at the counter. Mom folded towels. Dad read the paper like it might explain the weather. I stood at the doorway and watched them move, a spectator in a life I'd helped make fracture. I tell it like this because I need to show how ordinary it was before my choices made it monstrous. Eliza was the kind of person everyone forgave by default. She kept lists and apology notes even when no one asked. She made beds with hospital corners and left thank you texts for people who hadn't done anything. She was soft in a family that had learned how to be blunt, and surviving on that softness felt like a kind of miracle. Thomas was quiet in a different way. When he first came around, he laughed at Eliza's stupid jokes and brought her coffee on his way to work. He started telling me things in the winter, small, lonely things about being stuck in a relationship that felt like a well-worn coat. I said the things people say to each other when the truth is thin. That sucks. I'm here, you deserve better. But I'm here stopped being just polite when the way he looked at me felt like fuel. There's a thrill in being chosen by someone else loves. It is a selfish, shameful surge that crept up and made me pretend myself into something braver than I was. We never meant for anything to happen fast. It was minutes slipped into minutes. Late-night texts, a hand on a shoulder that lingered too long, a joke that turned into something else. One January night, he knocked on our back door. Eliza was out with a friend. The house smelled of wood smoke and chicken. I let him in because the porch light made his face look tired and human. "You can go," he said, voice low. "She's sleeping, right?" "Yeah," I said. And then the next hour was a blur of small movements. We talked about nothing, office gossip, the way the snow packed along the fence, until I forgot there was a line I hadn't crossed yet. He leaned forward and kissed me like the rest of the house had gone away, and in that instant, 1,000 little obligations dissolved. Afterwards, I was clever at compartmentalizing. I put my feet in different shoes for different rooms of my life. At breakfast, I told jokes and joked about the gray sky. In private, I replayed the way his hand curled against my palm. I told myself I was only giving comfort, that it didn't matter if my sister loved me or the world. I told myself that until the wrong name came out of his mouth at dinner, and the world tilted. We were finishing a meal when Thomas said it, an old slip, an inflection that belonged to someone else. It was a name I'd never heard. The air froze. Eliza's face tightened like a fist. She set her glass down with the kind of care that becomes an accusation. I watched my sister, the woman who had once braided my hair, slide away from the table and walk out into the storm wearing nothing but a thin coat. I stayed frozen, stupid with the kind of guilt that pockets itself in the throat. We called her cell until it went straight to voicemail. My brother grabbed his keys and drove off like he could outrun the night and the wrongness that hung in it. The police would later say the road had been treacherous. An old plow missed a curve, hydroplaning into the ravine. That's what they said with clinical calm. What I felt was the slow, inescapable drag of responsibility. Later, when things got worse, I would try to parse whether she'd driven that fast because she wanted to leave us, or because the storm had made a devil of the steering. I never knew. What I did know was that when the world opened up and swallowed her, my part in it was a ledger I could not close. My brother's revenge came quick and ugly. He found Thomas in the workshop that night and beat him until no one at the emergency room could say he'd survived the beating. The county decided on manslaughter. The papers said, temporary insanity. My brother said less. At the funeral, the crowd was a slow tide of condolences and cold glances. People wrapped themselves in polite phrases and moved away from my eyes. I walked through the front yard like I owned the snowshoes left outside, like I could stomp out the memory of Eliza's laugh by making deeper prints. The family fractured along lines I couldn't repair. Mom stopped answering my calls at first. Then when she did, it was like talking to someone through glass, distant and careful. Dad's anger folded into silence. They wanted reasons, explanations, someone convenient to point at. And there I was. Convenient, guilty, known. I tried to be small, to disappear behind chores and errands. But guilt is a thing that fills rooms. It sat beside me at the table, made toast in the mornings, and whispered sentences into my dreams. The aftermath is a slow, grinding thing. I moved out because the house could not hold me anymore. It ached with echoes of that name said wrong on a winter night. I took jobs that kept me busy, shifts that let me fold myself into motion so memory couldn't catch up. The town watched me like someone who'd stepped on an apple and kept walking. Their faces had the rough pity of people who understand blame because it's simple. Sometimes I picture the smallness of what I did, an ember that became a blaze. There is no redemption big enough to fill the hole I made. I have tried to atone in the ways people without means try. Apologies, letters I never send, showing up when I should have stayed away. None of it changes the fact that a life ended and another was ruined. Guilt became my identity because confession, as I have learned, does not free you. It just names you for what you are. If there is a lesson in this confession, it is this: selfishness can be ordinary. It slides into the everyday like a fog and hardens into something lethal if you do not speak it aloud, if you do not set boundaries for yourself. Wanting to be seen is not a crime, but taking from the people who trust you is. It is easy to believe the worst thing that happened to your life was an accident of weather or fate. The harder truth is that sometimes the worst things are the sum of small, avoidable choices. I keep this confession because silence is a kind of cruelty too. I am not trying to absolve myself by saying these words. I am only trying to place them where they can be looked at honestly. If you are reading this and you carry a secret that weighs on you, say it. Tell someone who can hold it without needing you to fix it alone. The cost of silence can be more than you ever meant to pay. The smallest betrayals, left unspoken and unexamined, can destroy lives. Honesty and boundaries, though difficult, are the only way to prevent a moment of selfishness from becoming a lifetime of regret. Long before that winter, long before the crash, the trial, and the moment my family stopped saying my name, I had already been carrying a fault line inside me. I grew up believing love was something scarce, something I had to compete for even when no one asked me to. My sister Eliza never had that problem. She was sunlight in a house that rarely opened its curtains. She made gentleness look effortless, forgiveness look holy. I envied her without admitting it, even to myself. If I'm honest, the story didn't begin with Thomas. It began years earlier, in the quiet moments where I measured myself against my sister and always came up short. But that winter, the winter everything broke. That was when my private weaknesses stopped being mine alone and turned into consequences with names, faces, funerals. I was back home for the holidays, pretending it was just another visit and not an escape from my own life unraveling in the city. My parents' house always smelled like cinnamon and old carpet, the kind of smell that reminded you that nothing ever truly changed here. Except us. Eliza lived only a few miles away with Thomas. They had been together for almost a decade, long enough that I sometimes forgot they weren't married. He used to be soft around the edges, warm laugh, warm eyes, but that winter he seemed tired in a way that made his face look carved. One night after dinner, he found me in the backyard as I smoked in the cold. Snowflakes clung to his hair. "You ever feel like everyone expects you to be happy all the time?" he asked. I shrugged. "I think people expect Eliza to be happy, and you just go along with it." He let out a hollow laugh. "You see more than you say." That should have been the moment I drew a line. Instead, I stepped over one. Maybe I wanted to feel seen for once. Maybe I wanted to feel special. Maybe I just wanted to feel anything other than second place. It started with long conversations, then long silences that meant more than they should. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong because there was no touching, no kissing, just shared secrets and glances that warmed parts of me I didn't want to admit existed. But desire doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it slips in through a crack you should have sealed. The affair didn't bloom, it rotted. Slowly, quietly. I would get texts from Thomas late at night. "Can't sleep. Thinking too much." I'd reply even when I knew I shouldn't. I'm awake too. What's wrong? He'd talk about feeling unseen in his own home, feeling like a supporting character in a story about Eliza. I should have said, talk to her. Not me. Instead, I said, I get it. There's a kind of intimacy that grows when two people begin to share the worst versions of themselves. It feels honest. It feels raw. It feels like connection. But really, it's corrosion. And I let myself believe I deserved the attention because it wasn't physical. Not yet. By January, the tension between us was something living, breathing. When we were in the same room, it felt like everyone else faded. Eliza, kind as always, never suspected a thing. She would smile at me and ask if I wanted more tea, unaware I was betraying her even while sitting beside her. One afternoon, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I'm so glad you're here. I feel less alone when you're around." That sentence should have stopped everything. Instead, it only made the guilt sharper and the temptation deeper. We kissed in his car 2 weeks later. Snow piled on the windshield, muffling every sound until it felt like the world paused just to witness our mistake. I remember thinking it felt wrong and right in the same breath. That conflict should have been enough to end it. But people addicted to validation don't choose endings. They wait for consequences. Eliza began to change before she knew the truth. She was quieter, easily startled. She'd stare at her phone as if bracing herself for bad news she couldn't name. One night she whispered to me, "Do you think Thomas is unhappy? Be honest." I swallowed panic. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged weakly. "He feels distant. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking." Guilt throbbed inside me like a bruise. I could have confessed then. I didn't. I told her she was imagining things, knowing damn well she wasn't. By February, the house felt like it was holding its breath. My parents sensed tension but assumed it was the usual winter melancholy. My brother Matthew kept shooting Thomas suspicious glances, but he never voiced why. The night everything shattered, we were all seated at the dinner table, me, Eliza, Thomas, and my parents. It was quiet, too quiet. My mother asked Eliza about wedding plans even though none existed. Eliza blushed, Thomas stiffened, and I stared at my plate. Then Thomas said my name, except he didn't. He said Eliza's name at first, and then corrected himself. Corrected himself into mine. Silence hit the room like an earthquake. Forks stopped. Breathing stopped. Even the clock on the wall sounded stunned. Eliza blinked slowly, as if trying to convince herself she misheard, but she hadn't, and she knew. She placed her napkin on the table, stood up, and without a word, walked outside into the storm. The wind swallowed her before the door even shut. My father shouted after her. My mother fumbled for her phone. Thomas froze in place. I remember reaching for the door and feeling Matthew's hand clamp onto my wrist with a force I'd never felt from him. "Don't," he growled. "You've done enough." Hours later, when the police found her car crumpled in a ravine off the icy highway, the officer said she likely lost control of the wheel. I knew better. She had lost control long before she reached the road. The days after felt like walking through ash. Thomas tried to apologize, to my parents, to Matthew, to me, but grief doesn't make space for apologies. Matthew was the only one who didn't cry publicly. He simmered. He paced. He clenched his jaw until it looked like it might crack. 3 days after the funeral, Thomas disappeared. We assumed he'd gone to stay with his brother. Hours later, police sirens wailed down our street. Matthew had found him. In the old garage where he and Thomas used to fix bikes as kids, he beat him with a baseball bat, one from his Little League years. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. When the officers pulled Matthew away, he didn't resist. He just stared at me across the driveway with an expression I still see when I close my eyes. An expression that said, "This is your fault." And also, "I did what you wouldn't." Thomas survived long enough to speak a few words in the hospital. He said it wasn't Matthew's fault. He said he deserved it. He said he hoped, somehow, Eliza knew he was sorry. He died that night. In the trial, the lawyers used words like temporary insanity, emotional break, diminished responsibility. My parents sat stiffly in the front row, aged 10 years and a month. I sat farther back because grief had exiled me from my own family. Nobody said it aloud, but everyone knew. Matthew hadn't just killed a man. He had shattered what little remained of us. The funeral for Thomas was smaller, quieter. No one looked at me. No one had to. Their silence was enough. When I returned to my apartment in the city months later, I found that everything familiar had turned foreign. I tried therapy, but each time I approached the truth, something in my throat closed. Guilt lived inside me like a second pulse, constant, rhythmic, punishing. Some nights I scroll through old photos of Eliza, studying her smile like an artifact. Sometimes she looks like she's asking a question. Sometimes she looks like she already knows the answer. I wish I could say I've forgiven myself. I haven't. I don't know if I ever will. The affair wasn't romantic or thrilling or passionate. It was a small, desperate hunger disguised as attention, and the cost was catastrophic. 2 lives are gone because of choices I made in moments when I wanted to feel wanted. My brother, once gentle and steady, now lives with a record and a weight he never deserved. And I walk around with a confession stitched into my ribs. Some days I think guilt is the only real companion I have left. Other days I fear I've built my identity around it. But I'm learning, slowly, painfully, that speaking the truth is the first step toward not drowning in it. And this is me speaking. Craving validation is not an excuse to cross someone else's boundaries. The damage done in moments of selfishness can ripple far beyond what we imagine. Choose honesty before secrecy, responsibility before desire, and courage before comfort, because one careless act can undo an entire family, and some consequences never fade. I should have known the city would teach me a lesson about cowardice in small doses. I grew up where noise was a shield, sirens, kids, a radio blaring through a cracked window, and you learned to look away because looking meant trouble. When I moved to Bold Street for the clinic receptionist job, I thought I had outgrown that muscle. I was wrong. The muscle never leaves you. It just learns better ways to hide. That morning the air cut like glass. My coffee was burnt. My hands smelled of paper and disinfectant from the morning stock. I was late. The kind of late that makes you walk faster than you should, weaving through people who look like they own the sidewalk. Then the shouting started sharp and wrong, a man's voice carving through the habitual noise. He was in front of the clinic, a thin figure with a hold of a poster so grotesque the colors seemed to bleed into the pavement. Women knelt near the entrance with rosaries in their hands like a small, private army. They whispered, eyes down, as if their silence could keep the world steady. I told myself I was just observing. Habit. I walked closer because curiosity is cheap. I stayed because I did not want to be noticed. He had the posture of a preacher who'd read his lines so often they felt like truth. Tiny bodies burning forever, he chanted, and his eyes caught mine for a fraction of a second. Sudden, searching, and I felt it like a cold snap. The chant wasn't prayer. It sounded like a rhythm that had been practiced to the point of smash. He stepped toward a teenage girl crossing the street and shoved the poster in her face. The girl stumbled. Her cheeks flushed the color of someone who'd been accused of a crime she didn't know she'd committed. Get away from her. I heard myself mutter. It surprised me. My voice always surprises me when it's brave. He turned, and the way his gaze moved over me was not the casual look of a man who wants attention. It was a prowl, mechanical and clinical, like a doctor checking a chart for anything that resembles guilt. Do you hear them? He asked, close enough now that I could see the twitch at the corner of his mouth. Do you hear the little ones screaming? His words were meant for me, and for some reason I froze as if my feet had been nailed to the pavement. A woman on the sidewalk finally called the police. Someone else pushed the poster away from the girl. Others filmed on their phones. 2 officers arrived in the kind of bad cop, good cop duo that wears authority like armor. They spoke calmly while he flailed at rationale. "I'm saving souls," he said, almost pleading when the cuffs tightened. The princess hysteria of the scene collapsed into procedure, and the kneeling women stood like something waiting to be excused. I walked into the clinic with my cheeks burning. The telephones buzzed. The waiting room hummed with the low, polite anxiety of people who had appointments and histories. A teenage boy behind the counter made a joke about the weather and I laughed too loudly, wanting to seem casual. Inside, I kept hearing the cadence of his chant in the hollow between heartbeats. It followed me to the break room, settled over the copy machine, sat on the edge of every mundane task. "I think I should have done something," I admitted to Rita, the nurse who ran the morning shift, as if saying it out loud would make it truer, or less sharp. She shrugged and slid a mug my way. "You did what a lot of people did, Mark. You watched. The cops arrived. He'll get processed." But he pointed at a kid. "He scared her," I said. I stood there. I did nothing. "You didn't put your life on the line," she said. "Don't make martyrdom out of fear. Some people are violent. Some people are sick." Her words were reasonable and they landed like stones. I wanted them to settle, to build something like absolution. Instead, they churned at the gut like a warning. The rim of the city is full of people who become a sermon or a footnote. The man was a news clip by noon, a name nobody remembered by dinner. The kneeling women returned to their rosaries and prayers as if that could scrub the edges of what had happened. But my memory insists on the specifics, the way his voice caught when the officers led him away, the way the teenage girl's backpack hung crookedly on her small frame, the way my hands went numb from where they had held the coffee cup. At home that night, I replayed the scene like a tape I rewound with great care. The more I examined it, the clearer the truth. I didn't step in because I was afraid of being targeted. Not because I thought I couldn't overpower him, it's not that kind of fear, but because confrontation in my family meant escalation, and escalation meant ruin. I was raised to value quiet stability above moral grandeur. In my house, public arguments ended with slammed doors and family members not speaking for months. I'd learned to be invisible. When I tried to explain that to my sister over the phone, she cut me off with the bluntness that had always been her defense. "You froze, Mark. That's on you." Her voice was hollow, not cruel. It was the way of someone who didn't have the energy to coddle the cowardly. A week later, I walked past the clinic again. The poster wasn't there, but the memory of its colors remained, like an afterimage. The teenage girl I had watched was on the sidewalk, headphones in, walking with a friend. She didn't look at me. Maybe she didn't remember me. Maybe she did. I wanted to run up and apologize, to say I was sorry for the man and for my silence. The words stuck behind my teeth. I listened to the rhythm of the city's ordinary noise and felt the chant settle into its hidden grooves. There is a difference between fear and responsibility. Fear is immediate. Responsibility is a tidal thing. It finds you in the moments after. My confession is not that I was afraid. It's that I accepted fear as my default, without challenging it. That acceptance is a decision that costs more than you think. The man with the poster had conviction. He wore it like armor, and it scared people into submission because conviction masquerades as righteousness. Worse, conviction makes bystanders question their silence as moral failure. I had to live with that question. On a rainy afternoon, I finally took a step, small as it was. I found the teenage girl at the bus stop. "Hey," I said, stupidly tender. "You okay?" The morning. She looked at me, and the expression on her face was not outrage but an exhausted, wary patience. "Yeah," she said, "but it was messed up. Thanks for..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. It felt like a bridge built from two planks. Fragile, but a bridge nonetheless. We spoke for a minute about small things: the morning, school, the smell of rain. I told her I was sorry I hadn't done more. She shrugged like people her age do at the weight of adults. "A lot of people froze," she said. "It happens. Not your fault." Maybe she was right. Maybe responsibility lands differently on different shoulders. But for me, the apology was an obligation I owed to myself as much as to her. I wanted to believe that saying sorry was the beginning of undoing. It felt like a thread pulled from a sweater. You couldn't knit the whole thing back, but you could stop it from unraveling further. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing action despite it. Silence in the face of cruelty lets conviction grow into violence. Speaking up, even imperfectly, keeps ordinary people from becoming complicit. When people ask me where my sleep problems began, I usually point to the farmhouse on Hollow Ridge Road, to the way the windows rattled on windy nights and how the porch light seemed to dim an hour earlier than anywhere else. But if I'm honest, the truth starts earlier, a slow slide into a habit that felt less like comfort and more like armor. My mother worked nights at the hospital. Mornings she was a ghost who moved in the kitchen with the careful slowness of someone who had already been awake for 16 hours. The house sat between a stand of maples and a sagging fence, and in winter the road creaked under tires like an old piano playing the same wrong note. I was 8 when the warm milk started. It was my asking that began it, the tiny voice that would wake me in the dark. "Can I have warm milk?" I said it without thinking, like a reflex, and she would come, hair tucked under a scarf, robe trailing the floor, carrying a steaming cup. It tasted like cinnamon and safety. She never made a show of it, never fawned. But there was a tired tenderness in the way she brushed my hair back. For a while it worked. I would sip, tuck my blanket tighter, and drift off. But the milk wasn't the cause. The milk was a response to the cause, a way to drown out a strange, visceral terror that had arrived unannounced and refused to leave. The night it started, I thought I'd woken from a nightmare that had nothing to do with monsters, a hallway of doors opening and closing, each one revealing a different version of me. But when I blinked awake, something else was in the room. At the edge of my bed, where the nightlight couldn't reach, stood a shadow, tall, still, like a dark silhouette held up by windless air. It didn't move, but its presence pressed against the back of my head like someone leaning there, waiting for permission to breathe. I froze, my throat tightened, my body wouldn't manage the small, brave sounds I had practiced. I whispered, "Mom?" The shadow didn't answer. The room was that sick quiet when old houses remember everything that has happened inside them. I felt both very young and very exposed, like a word that had been said out loud too soon. Eventually my mother came, as she always did when I called, with the warm mug. She squinted at the corner, a careful frown, and said, "I thought I saw something on the porch earlier." She put the cup in my hands and stayed until I blinked steady. Later she would call it a bad dream when I tried to tell her. I never said the words that named what I'd felt, how the shadow seemed to know the shape of my fear. After that night everything changed in small increments. I stopped sleeping through the night. I learned to gauge the house by sounds, the way the pipes sighed, how the floorboard by the attic door creaked 3 times in a row if the wind picked up. I learned that milk dulled the edge of whatever waited at the periphery. When the moon was high and the road was empty, I would wake with my palms damp and call for it. Each cup was a tiny white flag, each sip a promise that the shadow would not cross the room while I found myself again. When the security camera went up that winter, my mother said it was because of the trucks that sometimes rattled by too fast. She set it on a post facing the driveway and the fence, more a piece of reassurance than surveillance. I never knew she checked the footage. She had a way of making decisions like that, quiet and quick, then carrying on as if nothing had shifted. It wasn't until years later, after we had both moved on from the farmhouse and the wind-split nights, that she showed me the clips. It was after a funeral and after too many coffee cups and after the work of living had hollowed us both in different ways. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with an old laptop open like a secret. The footage was thin and grainy, the night vision painting the yard in unreal blues and blacks. At first there was nothing but the sway of branches, a fox crossing, then like a slow breath a dark figure leaning against the fence. It stood there on several nights, always in the same place, always for long stretches, watching the house as if memorizing the angles of the porch light and the way the snow settled on the fence. My mother clicked through the timestamps with a small, stunned sound. "We called the sheriff once," she said, voice low. "They said it was probably a hiker or a shadow." Their conclusion felt like a polite dismissal, like a bandage slapped over a slow infection. I watched the grainy shape and felt something I had kept folded down begin to unfold. The memory of the night terror, the coiled panic, the way I would hold the mug too tight until the heat burned my palms. I left Hollow Ridge when I was 18 with 2 suitcases and a stubbornness that felt like armor. I told myself I was running to college and purpose and the small city lights, not away from the past. For a long time, the pattern followed me. New apartment, different thermostat, same ritual. Heat, milk, sip, breathe, sleep. Sometimes the milk was tea. Sometimes it was nothing at all and I would stare at the ceiling until dawn, cataloging noises. People told me to stop. "You're an adult," they would say. "You don't need to sleep with rituals." They were right in the obvious ways. I didn't need milk. But ritual is not always about need. Ritual is about control. Sometimes, in late nights when the city felt like a soft, cushioned, dark, I would imagine the shadow at Hollow Ridge, leaning against another fence, looking for the precise geometry of a child's room. I started to understand why my mother had set up that camera the way she had, not to catch a trespasser necessarily, but to give ordinary nights a frame. To prove to herself that whatever was out there had edges, knew where to stand. Years later, I told a therapist about the camera footage and the nights. She called it possible hypervigilance, the brain's response to danger. She gave me breathing exercises and a plan. It helped, in small, practical ways, but it didn't wash away the visceral certainty I carried, that some things, once noticed, keep noticing. Once the night knows you, it sometimes holds on. This is my confession. I still drink warm milk before bed. Some nights I warm it out of habit. Some nights I warm it because I am afraid. The truth lives in both. There is an old part of me that believes comfort is a shield you can hold against whatever waits in corners. There is a newer part that knows shields are temporary. The shadow, whether it was a man, a trick of light, or a memory shaped like a person, taught me that fear is not always an enemy to be defeated. Sometimes fear is a messenger carrying a fact. Pay attention. I haven't seen the silhouette since the camera footage, and maybe that is the thing that feels the worst. There is no final image to look at, no proof beyond the pixels on the screen and the memory lodged behind my eyes. The sheriff's notebooks will never hold the same weight as the nights I woke with my heart in my throat. I won't say I know what it was. I will say this: sleeping without the cup feels like stepping out onto a porch in the dark and forgetting the lock. The milk is small. The fear is large. Both are mine. There are practical things I do now. I leave the hall light on. I check the locks even when I know they are secure. I talk to friends about sleep hygiene, and, when I can, I tell the full story. That last part is the hardest. When you tell someone that you grew up with a watcher outside your fence, that the police shrugged, that your mother kept quiet because the world was loud and unforgiving, they look for neat endings. There aren't always neat endings. Sometimes the end is just a quieter room and the knowledge that you learned to live with a sound that sometimes wakes you. Fear on its own is not a weakness. It is a signal. Respect what wakes you at night, listen, and take practical steps to protect yourself, but don't let the fear become your only company. Comfort can be a tool, not a prison. And when the past lingers, name it, share it, and let community be the light that helps you close the curtains without forgetting how to open them again. When the hotel let me go, it felt like being pushed out of a moving car. I'd been the girl who folded hotel robes with the care of someone performing a small ritual, who could remember guests' coffee orders and preferred pillow firmness. The boutique downtown was a second home until corporate restructuring made me a number and a terminated email. Rent still needed paying. My mother's medical bills didn't care about layoffs. My freelance design gigs were thin as tissue paper. I signed up for the site because I was tired, because I could do the math. Rent plus meds plus groceries, divided by the hours I was willing to work, and the result was scarily large. I told myself it was temporary, a pragmatic choice. I filled out a profile with measured words and a recent headshot, nothing flashy, nothing that might come back to bite me, and waited. It felt like taking a second job that required only conversation. Gary H. messaged within 2 days. He wrote, like someone who had practiced generosity, cultured compliments, references to jazz records, an oddly specific appreciation for mid-century furniture. He asked questions about my design work and then sent a link to an article he supposedly loved. Months of messages built a rhythm. Voice notes late at night, small gifts, requests for photos of the dresses he wanted me to wear. He said he liked to give, and when you're depleted, gifts feel like oxygen. There were red flags, of course. He avoided video calls. His voice notes had odd little edits, like someone trimming breaths. He insisted I wear only the pieces he sent, and when I pushed back, he framed it as playful affection. I ignored the discomfort because the money arrived, and because the attention felt like rescue. You can rationalize a lot when you're afraid of losing your home. When he suggested the island, he called it a haven for creative types, a quiet place to rest and let the tide do the thinking. I told myself privately, stubbornly, that I deserved a break. I booked the flight more to prove I could still make choices than because I trusted him. At the Miami hangar, The gold Versace fit like a second skin and made me stand a little straighter. When I saw him step out to meet me, the photos on his profile felt like props. He was older, thinner. His hands trembled occasionally, but he carried the kind of practiced ease that can be learned. On the jet, he talked about art acquisitions and an upcoming gallery he funded. He asked about my mother and remembered details I'd told him months earlier, which made me feel seen in a way nobody had lately. But his eyes kept darting away when I tried to look back, and he never once asked to see my face on camera. I let that pass, attributing it to privacy. I should have listened to the small voice that kept nudging this is not right, but I'd gotten used to silence and gifts and small comforts that filled the holes in my life. The villa on the island was cinematic, white columns, sprawling terraces, a view that looked like a photograph. For 2 heartbeats I believed in the miracle. Then I stepped inside and froze. 3 elderly men sat in a semicircle on velvet chairs, watching me like they were watching a performance. Their eyes lingered, assessing in a way that turned my skin into an insect's delicate shell. "Business partners," Gary said too loudly, as if that label could rearrange the scene. He introduced them in a way that made them sound like clients at an art auction. They clapped when he asked me to dance. Their compliments were sharp, transactional, as if my body were an object to be appraised. When one of them reached for my wrist, it felt like a buy-in rather than affection. The air in that room was thin with something older than lust, a market for novelty where I was the newest product. I snapped. I slapped him, a jarring, involuntary refusal. His dentures clattered to the floor and the room erupted into a sound like rusted hinges and angry bees. Gary started shouting my name in a voice that didn't match the tenderness of past messages. The air filled with panic and misunderstanding, and in the teeth of that chaos I ran. Escape is a strange, bright thing. Adrenaline makes you inhumanly efficient. I ran to the dock, hands raw and trembling, cut the ropes with fingers that barely obeyed me, and pushed the speedboat into the water. The motor coughed and came alive. The island's manicured paradise receded behind me like a bad postcard. Waves slapped the hull and I drove toward the horizon with a single, furious thought: get away. I didn't call the police. Fear felt like armor, then fear of not being believed, of being blamed for dressing the part, for wanting a respite that had gone wrong. When I landed in Miami, I checked into a small motel under a different name and slept for 18 hours straight. When I woke, the world was flat and ordinary again, and for a while that was enough. I quit the sugar daddy site the week after. I canceled numbers, deleted accounts, called my mother and lied about the island as a restorative week away, something I thought she'd approve of. The donations dried up, but so did the immediate pressure to choose between bills and dignity. Somehow people assume those are opposite ends of a spectrum. For many of us, they overlap. The things that keep you awake aren't always the big traumas. Sometimes it's the small, continual reminders. A UPS knock at midnight, an envelope without a return address, a dress left on your doorstep. Months later, a package arrived with a card that had no signature and inside, folded in tissue, a Versace dress, size tagged to my measurements. I felt my stomach plummet. I burned the card in a hotel ashtray and carried the dress to the dumpster. I watched as the edges curled black and thought about ash as a kind of punctuation. I never filed a report, which has become one of those choices that loops back and accuses you in the night. I was scared Gary would know where I lived, scared the men would come looking for the product they'd been denied. More than that, I didn't trust systems that had a habit of flattening nuance. A woman who accepted gifts out of need becomes a willing participant in the public's eyes. People draw neat lines, consent or coercion, but life draws them blurry and overlapping. Now I take other work. I teach a workshop on basic typography and help a friend with packaging design. My mother's bills are still a fixture at the table, but my debt feels less like a cliff and more like a hill I can climb. I still flinch when I hear a boat wake or when a message reads only, "For you." I still wear dresses, sometimes ones I buy, and I have learned to let the mirror confirm my agency. I call people before I meet them. I refuse gifts that make me feel owned. There is no single villain in this story. There are choices made in desperation, systems that commodify loneliness, and predators who exploit both. Survival can look like compromise, and asking for help isn't shameful. If anything, the moral is this: protect your autonomy before you must reclaim it. Build safeguards when fear is small enough to manage. Tell someone when danger feels plausible, and understand that dignity does not come with a price tag. If you receive a gift that costs you your peace, consider returning it unopened and asking for help. Trust your instincts. When they whisper, listen. When people complimented my syllabus, they meant it as praise. Clear objectives, measured readings, a mix of theory and practice that didn't ask students to do emotional labor they weren't paid for. I liked being predictable in my work. I liked the rhythm of office hours and grading, and the way a well-run seminar could hum like a machine that actually served people. I didn't expect my career to hinge on one semester, yet the fall I taught cross-cultural communication turned into a ledger of small violences that added up to something I still can't entirely account for. Marcello arrived in the second week of class, exchange student, paperwork neat, an accent that made certain words sound like ornaments. At first he was quietly attentive in a way that made me smile. Curious students are the lifeblood of teaching, but his attention was edged with a kind of measurement, as if he were assessing me. He corrected readings in the margins. He interrupted discussions with anecdotes meant to demonstrate how other cultures did things better. His tone slid between erudite and patronizing. When I asked him to explain his point to the class, he would look at my face with a small, surprised contempt and say, "Of course, Professor, you may not be familiar with," and finish with an offhanded lecture. The room tightened every time. I documented each incident. I wrote detailed notes, dates, quotes. I met with the department chair once, then twice. The administration listened the way institutions listen, polite, deflective, as if discomfort could be archived away. Cultural adjustment issues, they called it in the memo. A learning curve for international students. They suggested mediation workshops I had to approve, emails I had to craft in soft tones. I complied, because that's what academics do. We use rules and procedures to bandage power imbalances. I believed in the system, and I still do, in parts, but that belief frayed faster than I imagined. Marcello's behavior escalated. He began to openly dismiss my authority in lectures, cutting me off when I asked a question, derailing classroom discussions to pontificate about gender roles in his country, leaning back in his chair as if the seminar were a stage and he the only audience that mattered. He turned small disagreements into moral tests for the class. Ask him a question and you felt vulnerable, because his answers were always wrapped in superior certainty. His grades, oddly, were not excellent. They fluctuated. He argued about assessment rubrics, and then asked for extensions with irritation when work was returned. Claire enrolled because cross-cultural communication overlapped with her interest in ethnography. She was Taiwanese, softly spoken, with a research paper that read like a conversation you wanted to keep listening to. Marcello noticed her in the way predators notice a pattern. Patiently, as if learning an algorithm, he started sitting closer to her in class, offering comments that sounded supportive, until you saw how she tightened at the edges. She stopped joining study groups. She stopped volunteering answers. Once, after a seminar, she lingered behind to ask about a citation, and came out paler than when she'd gone in. I tried to handle it by protocol. I emailed Marcello asking him to respect classroom boundaries. I separated group seating. I scheduled a meeting with him to discuss professional conduct and the implications for his academic standing. He smiled and apologized with the thin sincerity of someone rehearsed. He said he valued learning from diverse voices and was merely passionate. Administration noted our meeting in a brief exchange and then closed the file with a recommendation for continued observation. I thought that would be enough because I had done what I was supposed to do. The rain that Friday began like a soft apology and then came down like a confession. Claire didn't show up. At first I thought she had an emergency or a sudden illness. She hadn't emailed. She hadn't texted. I waited until the end of class and called her office number. No answer. I sent students home with an extra reading and a quiet heaviness in my voice. Hours later, the campus police arrived. I remember the way the hallway smelled of wet coats, the way my hands felt suddenly foreign in my pockets. They told me Claire had been reported missing by a friend, and then found by a neighbor who'd heard a scream coming from a rental flat near campus. They said when officers arrived, they found signs of a struggle and a young woman with a burned forearm. The man who'd been with her, Marcello, was gone. There was a car parked near the property registered to a rental agency, a license plate traced to a driver who wasn't on file, and a set of bailment details that looked evasive in the slow, meticulous way criminals try to hide. The university reaction moved in a different direction than my panic. They provided counseling, they issued cautious statements about student safety, and they asked faculty to avoid speculating. The press called it an incident. Claire recovered physically but not without costs. The lighter burn was small on the skin and deep in the memory. She returned to campus wrapped in the kind of fragile armor survivors carry. Marcello was arrested on campus later that week after a neighbor tipped off the police who matched his description to the rental agency records. The charges were serious. Campus exhaled as if hope lived in neat legal boxes. And then, things became complicated in ways that left me raw and slashed. His family intervened with a lawyer who moved fast and polished. There were letters from an embassy that spoke in the careful language of diplomatic protection. There were financial offers, quietly delivered, that made administrators shift from procedural to transactional. I watched a case that could have had a public reckoning become a closed-door negotiation, a settlement, and an expedited deportation instead of a criminal sentence. He left the country, escorted, and the official line was that justice had been done in the way the system could muster. I confess that fury settled in me like a stone. I had documented, I had followed procedure, yet the system's appetite for prestige and revenue outweighed the voice of a frightened student and the memory of her injuries. I felt complicit, small, and ashamed. I had believed that by following the rules I was protecting students, but the rules had contours and exceptions, and the exceptions bent toward institutional self-interest. Claire came to my office after one thunderstorm, and she sat with her coat folded in her lap, fingers white at the knuckles. I remember the look that passed over her face when the thunder rattled pure, reflexive terror. She told me she felt watched even after Marcello's deportation, that she had nightmares about doors and lighters, that she worried the system had shrugged because a diplomatic letter had arrived with a stamp. We sat in silence for a long time. I wanted to say, I did everything I could, but even as I said it, the words tasted like excused failure. Now, years later, I still double-lock my office door. I have made a practice of listening louder, to student complaints, to staff whispers, to the small things that flicker at the edges of campus life. Sometimes I wake in the night and think I hear footsteps lingering outside my classroom door, the echo of someone who never quite left. Maybe it is my own shadow. Maybe it is memory pressing its face against the glass. I have given talks on institutional responsibility and consent protocols. I have advocated for clearer reporting lines and for refusing financial settlements that silence survivors. Change is incremental, but there is movement. I confess, finally, that the most corrosive part of the semester was not the violence itself but the way the institution accommodated it. The university calibrated its public face to risk and reputation, and let the fragile person's recovery become an internal matter. I learned that authority is not enough. Compliance with procedure can be hollow if the mechanisms that enforce justice are swayed by money and influence. I learned too that fear can live in thunder and that survivors' voices need amplification, not polite nodding. Do not mistake process for protection. Systems can be applied with good intentions and still fail the people they are meant to serve when pressure, financial, diplomatic, reputational, reshapes priorities. Listen to the small complaints, document them, and push beyond formalities when the stakes are human. Protecting students requires institutional courage. Refuse settlements that prioritize silence over accountability. Make advocacy louder than diplomacy when someone's safety is at risk, and never let paperwork be the last word on a person's suffering. People ask me now, sometimes, why a single night can live inside you for decades. They expect a clean turning point, a lightning strike that rearranges everything. For me, it was a thin, ordinary evening behind Crestline Cinema. The kind of place that smells like buttered popcorn and overworn carpet. I was 9 and small for my age, shadowed by my brother Jamie, who was 14, and had decided, in that particular grin and dare way he had, that he could be both protector and outlaw for the night. Our dad left $30 on the counter and went to night shift. Jamie tucked the bill into his pocket like it was a ticket to adventure. We walked across the strip mall with the easy confidence of two kids who belonged to each other. We bought the big soda with the extra straw and slipped into the velvet seats for a superhero movie that started loud and bright and somehow made the rest of the world feel smaller. By the time the credits rolled, the theater had emptied, and the sky outside had gone the kind of dark that feels like velvet, except cold. The parking lot lights were big moons that didn't make the shadows behave. "Let's hit Mickey D's," Jamie said, voice low, still tasting buttered popcorn. He liked the idea of safety and motion. A place open late, a place with other people. We crossed the lot, shoving our hands into our pockets against the wind. That's when the man saw us. He moved with polite confidence. Clean smile, jacket buttoned, voice a practiced easy. There was a boy with him, small, maybe 8, smaller than me, with an oversized sweater that hung off his frame and eyes that looked like they had been held open too long. The man said they needed help lifting a mattress into a van a block away, explained it like it was logistics, like it was normal. He said, "We'll only be a minute." The kind of sentence people use when they mean you should trust them, because they used harmless words. I almost said yes. My head full of comic book rules about heroism and helping people. I had the reflexive thought that helping strangers made you a good kid. Jamie, who could always read a room better than he read a book, paused and looked at the boy. The boy's hands trembled as if he was trying to hide how cold he was. His lips were pale and cracked. There was mud in the rim of his shoe. The sweater smelled faintly of smoke. Jamie's face went into a different set of expressions than not the smile he used with his friends, not the teasing brother grin. His chin tightened. His fingers curled into the pocket where the $30 bill had been. He looked at the boy like he was seeing an instrument out of tune. Then his eyes met mine and something moved through him. A kind of quick, alarmed clarity I hadn't seen before. "Come on," Jamie muttered, grabbing my wrist. He pulled me hard. We stumbled, nearly slipping on the thin sheen of ice that had crept across the parking lot that night. The man called after us, his voice changing. "Hey, you kids!" The boy's eyes followed us like a weather vane, pleading without sound. We ran behind the cinema, down the narrow service alley where the dumpsters kept the smell of the town, and Jamie kept pulling until my lungs burned, and my legs felt like they wanted to stop but didn't. He found the payphone by the back door, the kind that looked like a relic, a metal rectangle with numbers worn soft. He fumbled a quarter from his pocket with hands that shook, and I watched his fingers hit the rotary buttons in a rhythm that was too jagged to be calm. He misdialed twice, his jaw clenched. When the operator finally answered, Jamie's voice was so tight I thought he might split. "There was a man with a van," he said, "and a kid. They were behind the McDonald's." We ran. He kept talking, like if he filled the silence with facts the world would believe him more. He said he needed help moving a mattress. He had a clean smile, dark jacket. The boy looked. He couldn't finish. The sound of Jamie's voice in my memory is perforated with the static on the line. The officers came with the slow, methodical slowness of people who deal with missing kids more often than they sleep. They swept the strip mall, flashlights cutting the dark in wide arcs. They took our statements like a script. Names, ages, descriptions. No blood, no beaten child left in the parking lot. The van was gone. The man was gone. The officers said they would check cameras and canvass the neighborhood, and they left us with a card and a soft, patronizing "good job" that landed like someone trying to pat a hurt animal without knowing which way it would bite. Weeks later, a missing child alert blinked across local news. A boy, malnourished, pale, last seen with a man fitting the description. His body was found outside city limits. The network said things in the flat tones newscasters use when they know the worst but must keep the details under control. They said a suspected trafficking ring. They said the case was active. They also said nothing definitive, because the person who could have answered the most questions, the man with the clean smile, was nowhere. The world kept making sentences to contain the horror, and none of them fit. I carried the boy's eyes home like a stone in my chest. They visited me at night. At school, I would be writing math problems and my pencil would blur into the shape of those pupils, wide and exhausted. Jamie tried to be okay. He buried himself in video games and short anger jokes, in the way boys do when grief sits like a second shadow. Our father mostly worked more nights. We ate meals like practice sessions, chewing to make noise. No one offered the word trafficking at the table. The word felt like a newspaper headline that belonged to other people. Years later, I went back to the theater where we had been that night, older, and watched that same parking lot under different lights. It looked smaller in daylight, meaner in memory. I asked the ticket seller about cameras and he shrugged. "Old place," he said. "Not much tech." I thought about the van, about the man's smooth sentences, about how a small hand in a too big sweater could be mistaken for a random kid and vanish into the city like he'd never been there. The adult answer was ugly and simple. Systems miss the small things. They miss a half-minute decision by two kids that ends up being everything. Sometimes I wonder if the boy saw my brother and my smallness and read us for what we could be: a quick rescue, a momentary reprieve. Did he hope we would do more? Or did he know, in the deep part of himself that measures odds by late nights and empty stomachs, that he couldn't count on strangers? Both possibilities are like knives. I sleep with them anyway. I confess the thing that haunts me is not only that the boy died, but that the night still plays itself in slow forward motion. I see the scene, and I try to tweak it in my head. What if Jamie had screamed for help louder? What if I had let go of his hand and walked toward the van? What if we had been braver in a public place where bravery looked suspicious? None of the variations give me the boy back. They only make me more familiar with the ache of what could have been done differently. Jamie carries his own version of the night like a private wound. Sometimes he tells me he still thinks he heard the boy whispering, "I'm not his son," low as a prayer. He says it without looking me in the eye. I learned that heroism is not a bright cape moment. It is a string of small choices made under pressure. Sometimes the right choice is to run and call for help like Jamie did. Sometimes it's to intervene. The tragedy is that the calculus is not obvious to a pair of kids with a $30 bill and no training. The city still has a missing persons binder under a glass case in the precinct, and sometimes I stand there and look at the photocopies of faces and feel like one of those pages is mine. And maybe that is when I realize grief is a communal thing, even if the world tries to privatize it. See what's in front of you and listen to the small, sharp alarms that don't wear uniforms. Teach children and remind adults that helping can take many forms. Intervene when safe, run, and call for help when needed, and don't let politeness override caution. Systems will sometimes fail the smallest among us. That's why our vigilance matters. If you notice something off, say it out loud. Don't assume someone else will. Your action, however small, might be a map out of the fog.